Hey guys, imagine this. It's the dead of winter 20,000 years ago and you're a caveman, shivering in a cave that smells like a mix of wet mammoth fur and existential dread. No central heating, no Netflix, just you, a flickering fire, and a whole lot of frostbite waiting to turn your toes into jerky. How did these poor souls survive the freezing winters? Well, buckle up, because we're about to dive into the icy, absurd, and downright painful world of caveman survival, where every day was a battle against nature, bad decisions, and the occasional saber-toothed cat with a grudge. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Picture a world so cold your breath freezes mid-air, forming little clouds of regret that remind you why moving to a cave in the Ice Age was a terrible life choice. Our story begins in a frost-covered valley somewhere in what we now call Europe, but back then was just a giant snowy middle finger from Mother Nature. Meet Gronk, our caveman protagonist, a guy who's about as prepared for winter as a flip-flop is for a marathon. Gronk's not his real name, of course. Nobody had names back then, just grunts and vaguely threatening gestures. But we'll call him Gronk because it sounds like the noise you make when you realize you're out of firewood and it's -20 outside. Gronk wakes up on a slab of rock that's somehow colder than the air itself, his fur blanket doing about as much good as a paper towel in a blizzard. His first thought, why didn't I evolve in the tropics? His second thought, I hope Ugg didn't eat the last mammoth jerky. Ugg, by the way, is Gronk's cave buddy, a guy whose idea of personal hygiene is licking his fingers after gutting a fish. Together, they're the ultimate Ice Age odd couple, surviving not because they're smart, but because they're too stubborn to die. Winter in the Ice Age wasn't just cold, it was a cosmic level prank. Imagine temperatures so low your eyelashes freeze together, and the only thing keeping you alive is a fire that's more smoke than flame, because all your wood is wetter than a drowned woolly rhino. The landscape outside Gronk's cave is a wasteland of snowdrifts, ice, and the occasional frozen carcass of something that didn't make it through the night. Survival wasn't just a skill, it was a daily middle finger to the universe, which seemed hell-bent on turning you into a human popsicle. Gronk's morning routine starts with the thrilling task of not freezing to death before breakfast. Step 1. Check the fire. It's down to a sad little ember, because Ugg, in a rare moment of ambition, decided to improve the fire last night by throwing a damp log on it. Now the cave is filled with smoke, and Gronk's coughing like he's auditioning for the role of guy who dies first in a horror movie. He crawls over to the woodpile, 3 sticks and a twig that looks like it's mocking him, and starts the soul-crushing process of trying to coax a flame out of frozen kindling. Friction fire starting sounds romantic in history books, but in reality, it's just 2 sticks, a lot of swearing, or whatever the caveman equivalent was, probably aggressive grunting, and blisters that make you question your life choices. After an hour of rubbing sticks together, Gronk finally gets a spark, only for it to fizzle out because the universe has a personal vendetta against him. Meanwhile, Ugg's still snoring, dreaming of a world where food magically appears without him having to do anything. Spoiler alert, that world doesn't exist, and Gronk's about to wake him up with a well-aimed kick to the shins. Food is the next big problem, because in the Ice Age, grocery shopping meant chasing something with tusks and an attitude through a blizzard. The cave's food stash is looking grim. A half-eaten fish that's starting to smell like regret, a handful of berries that might be poisonous, but who's got time to check? And a chunk of mammoth meat so tough it could double as a club. Gronk's stomach is growling louder than a cave bear, but he knows going out to hunt in this weather is like signing up for a one-way trip to the afterlife. Still, starvation is a great motivator, so he grabs his spear, a stick with a rock tied to it, because caveman engineering was all about keeping it simple, and prepares to face the frozen hellscape outside. Before he leaves, Gronk checks his wardrobe, which is less fashion and more whatever keeps me from dying. His outfit is a patchwork of animal hides, reindeer, fox, maybe some mystery beast that smelled bad even when it was alive. Sewing? Forget it. These hides are held together with sinew and hope, and they're about as warm as a politician's promise. His boots, if you can call them that, are just more hides wrapped around his feet, offering all the protection of a wet sock. But Gronk's not here to win a beauty contest. He's here to not become a frozen statue. He glances at Ugg, who's finally awake and complaining about the cold, like he's the first person to ever notice it. "Oh, you coming?" Gronk grunts, which is caveman for "get off your lazy butt and help me not die." Ugg groans, grabs his own spear, and they head out into the snow, because nothing says teamwork like two guys who'd rather be anywhere else. The world outside the cave is a nightmare in grayscale. Snow's falling so thick it's like walking through a curtain, and the wind's howling like it's got a personal grudge. Visibility's down to about 3 feet, which is just enough to see the next snowdrift you're about to faceplant into. Gronk and Ugg trudge through the snow, their breath freezing on their beards, turning them into walking icicles. The plan? Find something edible before they become something edible. Hunting in the Ice Age wasn't like modern hunting, where you sit in a tree stand with a thermos of coffee. This was a high-stakes game of tag where the loser ends up as lunch. Their target today is a reindeer, because reindeer are the least likely to turn around and gore you. But finding one in a blizzard is like finding a needle in a haystack if the haystack was actively trying to kill you. After an hour of stumbling through snowdrifts, Gronk spots tracks. Fresh ones, thank the spirits. He and Ugg follow them, moving as quietly as two guys in crunchy snow can, which is to say, not quietly at all. The tracks lead to a clearing where a lone reindeer is grazing on some pathetic frozen grass. Jackpot! Gronk's heart races. This could be dinner for a week, maybe 2 if they ration it. He signals to Ugg, who's already daydreaming about napping by the fire. The plan's simple. Gronk flanks left, Ugg goes right, and they try not to screw this up. Spoiler alert, they're about to screw this up. Gronk creeps forward, spear raised, his hand so cold he can barely feel the weapon. Ugg, meanwhile, trips over a root and face plants into the snow with a grunt that echoes like a foghorn. The reindeer bolts, because of course it does, and Gronk's dreams of a full stomach vanish faster than you can say natural selection. Ugg scrambles up, spitting snow and excuses, while Gronk glares at him like he's considering using him as bait. Next time, back at the cave, defeated and still hungry, Gronk and Ugg face the harsh reality of their food situation. The fish is starting to look like a health hazard, and the berries are definitely poisonous. Ugg's already turning a weird shade of green from taste testing 1. The mammoth meat's their only option, but chewing it is like trying to eat a tire. Gronk's jaw aches just thinking about it, but he hacks off a piece with his flint knife, which is about as sharp as a bad idea. Cooking it over their sad little fire doesn't help much. It's still tougher than their will to live, but they choke it down because starvation doesn't care about your feelings. As night falls, the cave gets colder, the wind sneaking through cracks like an uninvited guest. Gronk and Ugg huddle close to the fire, wrapped in their smelly hides, trying to ignore the fact that they're one bad day away from becoming a cautionary tale. The fire's their lifeline, but keeping it going is a full-time job. Every few hours, one of them has to brave the cold to gather more wood, which is about as fun as it sounds. Gronk volunteers, mostly because he doesn't trust Ugg not to burn the cave down. Outside, the wind's screaming, and every step feels like a personal attack. He grabs what wood he can find, mostly frozen branches that snap like brittle bones, and hurries back, praying the fire hasn't gone out. It hasn't, but it's close, and Gronk spends the next hour coaxing it back to life while Ugg offers helpful advice like, make it warmer. Thanks, Ugg, real game changer. Survival in the Ice Age wasn't just about staying warm and fed, it was about outsmarting a world that wanted you dead. Gronk and Ugg aren't heroes, they're just 2 idiots trying not to become fossils. But as they sit there, shivering and chewing on leather-tough meat, they're alive, and that's a victory in itself. Tomorrow they'll try hunting again, or maybe they'll get desperate and eat those berries. Either way, the Ice Age doesn't care about their plans, and that's the real kicker. Winter's only just begun, and it's got a long, cold way to go. Alright, we're back in the frozen nightmare of the Ice Age, where Gronk and Ugg are still clinging to life like it's a bad bet they can't quit. Winter's grip is tighter than a mammoth's trunk around a sapling, and our boys are learning the hard way that survival is just a series of increasingly stupid decisions. Yesterday's failed reindeer hunt left them with nothing but sore muscles, frostbitten egos, and a cave that smells like desperation in bad fish. So, let's dive back into the absurdity of their existence, where every day is a new episode of how not to die in a blizzard. The morning after their hunting disaster, Gronk wakes up to find the cave colder than Ugg's enthusiasm for work. The fire's down to a pathetic glow, because, of course, Ugg forgot to add wood during his watch. Gronk's tempted to use Ugg's beard as kindling, but he settles for a glare that could melt ice if only the universe had a sense of irony. He drags himself to the woodpile, which is now just a sad collection of twigs that look like they gave up on life long before Gronk did. Fire starting, round 2. More rubbing, more grunting, more existential crises about why humans haven't invented matches yet. After what feels like an eternity, he gets a flame going, small but defiant, like a middle finger to the Ice Age itself. Ugg, meanwhile, is still curled up in his furs, muttering about how the cave was warmer in the summer. Thanks for the hot take, Ugg. With the fire barely keeping the cave above Arctic levels, Gronk's next priority is food, or rather, the lack of it. The mammoth meat's down to a lump so tough, it could probably knock out a cave bear. The fish is now officially a biohazard, and those berries? Ugg's still recovering from his taste test, looking like he's auditioning for the role of guy who regrets everything. Starvation's knocking, and it's not the polite kind. Gronk knows they can't afford another failed hunt, but the alternative, scavenging, sounds about as appealing as hugging a porcupine. Still, desperate times call for desperate measures, so he kicks Ugg awake and announces they're going foraging. Ugg groans like he's being asked to invent calculus, but he grabs his spear anyway, because even he knows an empty stomach is a great motivator. Foraging in the Ice Age isn't like picking apples at a farmer's market. It's more like playing a deadly game of what's edible, with stakes higher than a mammoth's tusks. The snow outside is knee-deep, and the wind slicing through their hides like a flint knife through butter. Gronk and Ugg trudge through the frozen wasteland, eyes peeled for anything that doesn't look like it'll kill them immediately. Spoiler alert, everything looks like it'll kill them immediately. They spot some shriveled plants poking through the snow, but half of them are probably poisonous, and the other half tastes like sadness. Gronk, ever the optimist, yanks up a root that looks vaguely familiar, only to realize it's the same kind that made Ugg puke last week. Ugg, for once, has the sense to say no, which is progress, if you squint. Their luck changes, sort of, when they stumble across a frozen carcass half buried in a snowdrift. It's a wolf, or maybe a fox, or maybe something that didn't read the survival manual. Either way, it's food, and Gronk's not picky when his ribs are playing peekaboo through his skin. He hacks at the carcass with his flint knife, which is about as effective as a spoon in a sword fight. The meat's frozen solid like nature's cruel version of a TV dinner, but they drag it back to the cave, because lugging a 50-pound ice block through a blizzard is just another Tuesday in the Ice Age. Back at the cave, the real challenge begins, thawing the meat without turning it into a science experiment. Gronk sets it near the fire, where it starts to sweat like Ugg during a rare moment of physical effort. The smell's not great, think wet dog meets expired yogurt, but they're past caring. Cooking it takes forever because their fire's still more smoke than flame, and every bite is a workout for their jaws. Ugg, ever the critic, complains it tastes like sad wolf, but he eats it anyway because the alternative is eating snow. Gronk's just happy to have something in his stomach, even if it's plotting revenge from the inside. But food's only half the battle. The cave's turning into an icebox and their fire's struggling to keep up. Gronk's starting to suspect the cave's cursed because every draft feels like it's aiming for his soul. He and Ugg take turns venturing out for more wood, which is about as fun as it sounds. The forest nearby is picked clean, so they're forced to trek farther, into a valley where the snow's so deep it's practically a personality trait. Gronk's boots, still just hides wrapped around his feet, are soaking wet, and his toes are starting to feel like they're auditioning for the frozen food aisle. Ugg, predictably, trips over a rock and lands in a snowbank, where he flails like a turtle on its back. Gronk would laugh, but he's too busy trying not to become a permanent part of the landscape. They manage to gather a pitiful bundle of branches, most of which are so wet they might as well be sponges. Back at the cave, Gronk's fire-starting skills are put to the test again, and he's starting to think the spirits hate him personally. The fire sputters, smokes, and eventually catches, but it's a constant battle to keep it alive. Ugg, in a rare moment of usefulness, suggests using some of their spare hides to block the cave's entrance and keep out the wind. It's not a bad idea, but Gronk's still annoyed he didn't think of it first. They rig up a makeshift curtain using sinew and sticks, which helps a little, but the cave's still colder than Ugg's work ethic. As the days drag on, Gronk and Ugg settle into a grim routine. Tend the fire, choke down whatever food they can find, and try not to kill each other out of sheer boredom. The Ice Age didn't have board games or small talk, so entertainment's a problem. Gronk tries carving a stick into something resembling a figure, but it ends up looking like a sad potato. Ugg, meanwhile, discovers he can make fart noises with his hands, which he thinks is hilarious until Gronk threatens to use him as firewood. They're not exactly living the dream, but they're alive, which is more than a lot of their neighbors can say. The real kicker comes when a storm rolls in, turning their already miserable existence into a full-on survival horror. The wind's screaming like a banshee and snow's piling up outside the cave like nature's trying to bury them alive. The fire's their only defense, but the wood's running low, and Gronk's starting to wonder if they'll make it through the night. He and Ugg take shifts keeping the fire going, which is less about teamwork and more about not trusting the other guy to not screw it up. Gronk's out in the storm again, grabbing whatever branches he can find, when he hears a howl that's definitely not the wind. Wolves. Because of course there are wolves. Nothing says Ice Age like a pack of hungry predators circling your cave like it's an all-you-can-eat buffet. Gronk sprints back, nearly losing a finger to frostbite, and barricades the entrance with every rock and stick he can find. Ugg, for once, doesn't complain. He's too busy clutching his spear like it's a teddy bear. The wolves don't attack, thank the spirits, but their howls keep Gronk and Ugg awake all night, wondering if they're next on the menu. By morning, the storm's calmed, but the damage is done. The cave's colder than ever, their food's almost gone, and Gronk's starting to think Ugg's looking at him like he's a potential snack. Survival's a grind, and winter's not letting up. They need a new plan, something better than hope for a miracle. Gronk's got an idea, but it's risky. Head to the river, where there might be fish under the ice. It's a long shot, but starvation's a great motivator, and they're running out of options. As they gear up for the trek, Gronk can't shake the feeling that the Ice Age is laughing at them, and it's got a cruel sense of humor. Winter's not just a season, it's a test, and they're barely passing. Here we are, plunging back into the frozen soap opera of Gronk and Ugg, our Ice Age underdogs who are somehow still alive despite the universe's best efforts to turn them into caveman popsicles. Winter's been slapping them around like a grumpy mammoth, and their latest plan, fishing in a frozen river, sounds like the kind of idea you come up with when you're so hungry you're hallucinating. The cave's colder than a tax collector's heart. Their food stash is basically a museum exhibit of bad decisions, and the wolves outside are probably taking bets on how long these two knuckleheads will last. So, let's dive into the next chapter of their saga, where desperation meets dumb luck in a frosty, absurd dance of survival. The morning after the wolf scare, Gronk's up before dawn, mostly because sleeping on a rock slab feels like cuddling a glacier. The fire's barely hanging on, a flickering middle finger to the cold, and Ugg's still snoring like he's practicing for the caveman choir. Gronk's tempted to let him freeze, but he needs Ugg's spear arm, or at least his ability to trip and distract predators. He kicks Ugg awake, ignoring the usual grumbles about how fish are stupid anyway, and they start gearing up for their river adventure. Their gear is just more hides, a couple of spears, and a flint knife so dull it's practically a butter spreader. Gronk's boots are now so soggy they squish with every step, and Ugg's complaining about his toes, which are turning a shade of blue that doesn't scream healthy. But starvation's a great motivator, so they head out, hoping the river's got something edible under all that ice. The trek to the river is a nightmare, because of course it is. The snow's up to their waists now, and every step feels like wading through frozen molasses. The wind's howling, flinging ice crystals in their faces like nature's glitter bomb, and visibility's so bad they can barely see their own hands. Gronk's leading the way, mostly because Ugg keeps stopping to adjust his hides, which is caveman code for I'm too cold to move. After what feels like a lifetime, they reach the river, which is less a river and more a sheet of ice thick enough to support a mammoth. Gronk's plan, because he's the brains of this operation, which isn't saying much, is to smash through the ice and fish like their lives depend on it. Spoiler, their lives depend on it. Breaking the ice sounds simple, but in practice, it's like trying to crack a boulder with a twig. Gronk grabs a rock, because caveman ingenuity is all about using whatever's lying around, and starts hammering at the ice. Each hit sends a jolt up his arm, and the ice laughs in his face, barely cracking. Ugg, ever the team player, stands back and offers encouragement like, "Hit harder, dummy." Thanks, Ugg, real MVP. After an eternity of smashing, they finally break through to water so cold it could freeze your soul. Now comes the fun part. Fishing with no net, no bait, and no clue. Gronk's strategy is to stab at the water with his spear and hope something swims into it. It's not a great strategy, but it's better than Ugg's plan, which is to sit on the ice and complain about how fish are slippery jerks. Miraculously, after hours of flailing, Gronk spears a fish, small, bony, and probably as miserable as they are, but it's food. Ugg, inspired by actual success, manages to stab another one, though he nearly falls through the ice in the process. They've got 2 fish, which isn't exactly a feast, but it's better than chewing on their own boots. The trek back to the cave is even worse, because now they're carrying slippery, freezing fish, while the wind tries to knock them into next week. By the time they stumble into the cave, they're half frozen, and the fire's down to embers again, because the Ice Age never misses a chance to kick you when you're down. Gronk's hands are too numb to start the fire properly, so Ugg, shockingly, takes a turn, rubbing sticks together like he's trying to summon a demon. It works, barely, and they huddle around the pathetic flame, gutting their fish with the enthusiasm of 2 guys who'd rather be anywhere else. Cooking the fish is a whole new disaster. The fire's too weak to do much, so the fish are half raw, half charred, and taste like regret with a side of smoke. But they eat because hunger doesn't care about your Yelp review. Gronk's starting to think they might actually survive this winter, but then he remembers they're still in the Ice Age, where optimism is just a setup for disappointment. With their bellies slightly less empty, Gronk and Ugg face the next challenge, keeping the cave livable. The hide curtain they rigged up is doing about as much good as a screen door on a submarine, and the cold sneaking in like an uninvited guest who won't leave. Gronk's got an idea, because he's apparently the only one who gets ideas, to insulate the cave with snow. Yes, snow. It sounds like the dumbest plan since Ugg tried to befriend a cave bear, but Gronk's heard from some other cave dude that packed snow can trap heat, or maybe he dreamed it. Either way, they're out of options, so they start piling snow against the cave walls, turning their home into what looks like an igloo designed by idiots. It's exhausting work, and Ugg's whining reaches new heights, but by the end, the cave's slightly less freezing, which is as close to a win as they're gonna get. Days blur into weeks, and the routine is soul-crushing. Keep the fire going, scavenge for wood, eat whatever doesn't kill you first. Entertainment's still a problem, so Gronk starts telling stories, mostly about the time he almost got eaten by a saber-toothed cat, which he exaggerates to make himself sound heroic. Ugg's not impressed, but he counters with his own story about the time he invented throwing rocks at birds, which mostly just annoyed the birds. It's not exactly Shakespeare, but it passes the time. And in the Ice Age, not dying of boredom is a victory. Then comes the next curveball. A crack in the cave ceiling starts dripping water. At first, Gronk thinks it's a miracle, fresh water without leaving the cave, but then the dripping turns into a steady stream, and the cave floor is turning into a muddy skating rink. The ice outside's starting to thaw, just enough to make everything wet and miserable, but not enough to end winter's reign of terror. Gronk and Ugg try to plug the leak with mud and hides, but it's like trying to fix a sinking ship with a bandage. The cave's now cold, wet, and smells like a swamp, which is somehow worse than just cold. Gronk's starting to wonder if the spirits are punishing them for Ugg's terrible fish-gutting skills. Their next trip to the river is a bust. The ice is too thin to walk on now, but too thick to break easily, because nature's got a PhD in screwing with you. They come back empty-handed, and Gronk's starting to feel the weight of winter in his bones. Ugg's not helping, spending most of his time carving nonsense into the cave walls, like he's trying to start the world's worst art gallery. Gronk's tempted to carve Ugg is useless next to it, but he's too tired. The food situation's dire again, and the wolf carcass is long gone. They're down to scraping lichen off the rocks, which tastes like despair and makes Ugg gag dramatically. Gronk's starting to think they need to move, find a new cave, maybe one that doesn't hate them. But moving in the Ice Age is like signing up for a triathlon with no training, and the nearest decent cave is probably guarded by something with claws and a bad attitude. As they huddle by the fire, chewing on what might be their last meal, Gronk can't shake the feeling that Winter's playing a long game and they're losing. But giving up isn't an option, not when you're too stubborn to die. Tomorrow, they'll scout for a new cave, or maybe they'll get lucky and find a hibernating bear to steal from. Either way, the Ice Age is watching, and it's got a front row seat to their misery. Welcome back to the frozen circus of Gronk and Ugg, where the Ice Age is serving up misery like it's got a vendetta and an unlimited budget. Our caveman duo is barely hanging on, their cave now a damp, freezing mess that makes a porta-potty look like a 5-star resort. The food's gone from scarce to, is this rock edible, territory, and their latest fishing trip was a flop that left them with nothing but soggy hides and bruised egos. Winter's not just a season anymore, it's a full-time bully, and Gronk's starting to think it's personal. With their current cave leaking like a sieve and the wolves outside probably writing a cookbook featuring them, they've got a new plan. Find a better cave or die trying. Spoiler alert, dying's always on the table in the Ice Age. So, let's jump into the final act of this frosty fiasco, where survival's a coin toss and the odds are rigged. Gronk wakes up to the sound of dripping water, which is now less miracle and more the cave's trying to drown us. The fire's barely alive, because Ugg's idea of tending it is to stare at it like it's going to magically get stronger. Gronk's had it with this cave. Between the leaks, the drafts, and the fact that it smells like Ugg's feet, it's time to move. He shakes Ugg awake, ignoring the usual whining about how moving's hard, and lays out the plan. Scout for a new cave, one that doesn't hate them as much as this one does. Ugg, predictably, suggests staying put and waiting for spring, because he's apparently forgotten that spring's about as real as a unicorn in the Ice Age. Gronk grabs his spear, his flint knife, and what's left of his optimism, about half a spark, and they head out into the snow, because nothing says fresh start like risking frostbite for a pipe dream. The world outside is a frozen nightmare, as usual. The snow's piled so high it's like walking through a maze designed by a sadist, and the wind's cutting through their hides like it's got a personal grudge. Gronk's leading the charge, mostly because Ugg keeps getting distracted by shiny icicles, which he thinks are pretty until one nearly impales him. Their goal is a rocky outcrop a few miles away, where Gronk's pretty sure he saw a cave last summer. Of course, pretty sure in the Ice Age means I might have hallucinated it, but they're out of options. The trek is brutal, every step's a battle against snowdrifts, and their boots are now so waterlogged they're basically wearing swamps. Ugg trips, because of course he does, and lands face first in a snowbank, muttering something about how snow tastes better than lichen. Gronk doesn't have the energy to argue, but he's starting to think Ugg's accidents are nature's way of saying thin the herd. After hours of slogging, they reach the outcrop, and, miracle of miracles, there's actually a cave. It's small, dry, and doesn't smell like despair, which is a major upgrade. The catch? It's occupied, not by people, thank the spirits, but by a pile of bones that suggests something big and grumpy calls this place home. Gronk's hoping it's a hibernating bear, because that's the kind of optimism you develop when you're starving. Ugg, meanwhile, is already backing away, muttering about how bears are jerks. Gronk's not thrilled either, but a dry cave is worth a little risk, so they creep inside, spears ready, praying they don't wake up a furry landlord with claws. The cave's empty for now, but the bones are a reminder that their new home comes with a no refunds policy. They set to work making it livable, clearing out the bones, rigging up a new hide curtain, and starting a fire with the driest sticks they've got. It's not cozy, but it's better than their old swamp cave, and Gronk's almost feeling hopeful until Ugg points out they still have no food. Right, food, the whole reason they're in this mess. With the new cave secured, they need to hunt or forage, and fast, because lichen's not cutting it anymore. Gronk's got a new plan, track a herd of reindeer he's heard rumors about from another cave dude who passed through last week. The guy was half dead and raving about ghost deer, so it's not exactly a reliable tip, but desperation's a great motivator. They head out at dawn, spears in hand, hides wrapped tighter than ever, because the cold's still out to get them. The snow's lighter today, but the wind's still a jerk, and every step feels like a personal insult. After hours of wandering, they spot tracks, reindeer, fresh, and heading toward a valley. Gronk's heart does a little flip, because this could be their big break. Ugg naturally trips over a root and nearly impales himself on his own spear, but Gronk's too focused to care. They follow the tracks, moving as quietly as two guys in crunchy snow can, which is to say, not quietly at all. The valley's a jackpot, a small herd of reindeer grazing on whatever sad patches of grass they can find. Gronk and Ugg hunker down, planning their attack. The last hunt was a disaster, so Gronk's determined to get this right. He signals Ugg to flank right while he goes left, and for once, Ugg doesn't screw it up immediately. They creep closer, spears ready, hearts pounding. Gronk picks a target, a young reindeer, not too fast, not too mean. He throws his spear, and, holy spirits, it hits. The reindeer stumbles, and Ugg, in a rare moment of competence, lands a second hit. The herd scatters, but they've got their prize. Dragging it back to the cave is a nightmare. Reindeer are heavy, and the snow's not helping, but they manage, mostly because Gronk threatens to leave Ugg behind if he doesn't pull his weight. Back at the new cave, they butcher the reindeer with all the finesse of two guys who've never heard of a cutting board. The fire's roaring now, thanks to some miraculously dry wood they found, and the smell of roasting meat is the closest thing to heaven they've experienced in weeks. They eat like kings, or at least like cavemen who aren't starving for once, and Gronk's starting to think they might actually make it through this winter. Of course, the Ice Age loves a plot twist. That night, as they're basking in their rare victory, they hear it, a low growl from outside. The bear's back, and it's not thrilled about the new tenants. Gronk and Ugg grab their spears, because nothing says welcome home like a 500-pound eviction notice. The bear doesn't charge, thank the spirits, but it paces outside, sniffing the air like it's reviewing their cooking. They spend the night wide awake, clutching their weapons, wondering if they've traded one death trap for another. By morning, the bear's gone, but the message is clear. This cave's not a free ride. Days turn into weeks, and Gronk and Ugg settle into their new home, always on edge for the bear's return. The reindeer meat keeps them going, but they're careful to ration it, because they know winter's got more tricks up its sleeve. They improve the cave, more snow insulation, a better fire pit, even a pile of rocks to block the entrance if the bear gets any ideas. Ugg's still useless half the time, but he's getting better at fire starting, which is a small miracle. Gronk keeps telling stories to pass the time, and Ugg's cave art is starting to look less like nonsense and more like a cry for help. Winter's still a beast, but they're fighting back, one dumb decision at a time. As the days get marginally longer, Gronk notices the snow's not falling as hard. The ice is thinning and there's a hint of warmth in the air, like the Ice Age is finally getting bored. They're not out of the woods yet, literally or figuratively, but they've survived longer than most. Gronk and Ugg aren't heroes, they're just two idiots too stubborn to quit. And as they sit by their fire, chewing on reindeer and listening for bears, they know one thing: the Ice Age can throw whatever it wants at them, but they're not going down without a fight. Winter's a cruel teacher, but they're learning, one frostbitten step at a time. Hey guys, picture this. You're waking up in the Paleolithic era, sun barely cresting the horizon, birds screeching like they've never had coffee, and you're staring at a pile of rotting mammoth meat. Scary, right? You're about to learn how your ancestors turned rancid danger into delicious dinner without the luxury of a fridge. So stick around. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Long before Tupperware and fancy food processors, our Neanderthal cousins were faced with the same primal question: how to keep yesterday's prize kill from becoming today's bacterial nightmare. Imagine trudging home under a sky dripping with stars, hauling behind you a half-ton woolly mammoth carcass on a sled made from bark and solidarity. The cool breeze might slow the stench, but come sundown, that glorious haul is an abscess of foodborne peril. And yet, somehow, they survived. In fact, they thrived, mostly thanks to a combination of ingenuity, desperation, and the kind of pain you only feel when you accidentally bite into a meat chunk that tastes like ancient cheese gone wrong. Let's rewind time to a dank cave somewhere in present-day France. Our hero, Groom, has just spearheaded a successful hunt. He manages not to slice his own leg, which, considering his spear is sharpened on rock, deserves a standing ovation. The clan is ecstatic. Victory chants echo off the stony walls. Kids scramble for scraps, and mothers prepare to deploy age-old preservation tactics. The first method? Smoking. No, not the nicotine kind, though one imagines the clouds inside a smoky cave gave it a run for its money. They'd build smudgy fires by the entrance, hang strips of meat on wooden spits, and let the smoke do its work. This wasn't just about flavor, though ancestral barbecue connoisseurs likely swooned. The smoke created a surface barrier, repelling bacteria and insects. It was like natural insect repellent meets preservative bag, minus the plastic, plus a lot more soot. Next up, drying. The clan would carve the fresh meat into strips thin enough to balance on a small twig, then drape them over lines of twine spun from animal sinew or plant fiber. Exposed to wind and sun, these strips became jerky, chewy, salty, and strangely addictive. It took patience, of course. Too little time and the meat would still spoil. Too much and you'd be chewing on something that might double as a doorstop. But once perfected, dried meat could last weeks, maybe months, and when you're living day to day, facing saber-toothed felines and unpredictable weather, months felt like an eternity. If you thought meat got all the preservation love, think again. Early humans also went nuts for nuts, literally, and berries. They discovered that fruits and seeds, when left to dehydrate in the hot sun, shrunk into concentrated power packs, tiny bombs of energy perfect for those days spent chasing down prey or outrunning mortal predators. And let's not forget primitive salting. When salt was at hand, often scraped from mineral deposits or dried lake beds, it was rubbed into meat or fish. Osmosis magic happened, bacteria got evicted, and flavors deepened. Of course, salt was rarer than a flawless obsidian blade, meaning only the luckiest clans had enough to rub on everything. Others resorted to ashes or clays, any mineral-rich powder that could draw moisture away. Water preservation also played its part. The concept of brining, soaking meat or fish in a salty solution, may have been too advanced at first glance, but paste-like lumps of animal fat offered a simpler form of airtight sealing. After cooking, meats were packed into hollowed-out gourds or animal stomachs, then drenched in melted fat. Once cooled, the fat solidified, sealing the contents from air. Imagine biting through a waxy top layer before reaching that tender morsel. It's exactly like modern potted meat, except your can is biodegradable. This method made it possible to store food for weeks, even months, tucked away from scavengers and fungi alike. Fast forward to the world of fermented foods. Cavemen might not have had the vocabulary, but someone accidentally left a tuber next to a puddle of rainwater and realized, upon smelling its sour tang, that it wouldn't kill you. If managed right, it could be downright delicious. Fermentation gave birth to early beer, cheese, and pickles. Wild yeasts and bacteria converted sugars into alcohol or acids, producing beverages that, ironically, were often safer to drink than the water itself. Cheese and fermented fish were pungent experiments, each bite a gamble between culinary delight and digestive rebellion. Yet, the payoff was a stable protein source that could last through lean winters. All these methods had one thing in common. They demanded ingenuity, discipline, and a willingness to embrace flavors so wild they'd make a modern foodie blush. Picture a clan elder handing you a piece of half-smoked mammoth liver. You're starving, you're cold, and your options are limited. So you chew. The smoke tickles your nose, the salt stings your tongue, and that gut-churning tang reminds you that you are, indeed, very alive. That is survival, cooked in adversity, served with irony, and gnawed on for the sheer thrill of it. In the absurd theater of prehistory, food preservation wasn't just a luxury, it was a declaration of victory over time and decay. Every strip of jerky, every jar of fermented tuber, every salted fish head dangling by the cave mouth was a badge of honor. It said, we lived through another day, we bested the elements, we outwitted spoilage. And if you think these methods sound medieval or even medieval adjacent, remember, as recently as a few centuries ago, many of these techniques persisted. Smoking huts filled the air with acrid haze, salt houses stretched along coastlines, and every village had a fermenting barrel or two lurking in the corner. But amidst the triumph, there was pain. Blisters from endless salting, smoke-stung eyes watering like spring, the lingering dread of a failed batch of fermented fish. And that's the beauty of it. Survival was ugly, stinky, and relentless. Our ancestors didn't have the safety nets of modern sanitation or the sweet relief of a fridge beep reminding them to toss that expired yogurt. They had stone, fire, salt, and the unshakable belief that if they didn't figure out preservation, tomorrow's hunger would sell their souls to the wolves. And now, as you sit in comfort, touchscreen in hand, consider this. The next time you swipe open that fridge door, pause. Envision the smoky haze of a prehistoric cave, the sun-bleached strips of jerky rattling in the wind, the primal reverence for food that couldn't be taken for granted. Then take a bite of that sandwich you so casually assembled and whisper a quiet thanks to the ragtag chefs of yore, because without them, you'd be chewing on raw mammoth, and frankly, nobody wants that. They tore apart the mammoth like gluttonous toddlers on sugar, but what happened when tribes ventured beyond the smoke and sun belt into realms where the air conspired against them? Picture a sprawling valley at dawn, a bone-chilling gale whipping through rocky crags, turning every exhaled breath into a frozen plume. The clan's food cache, meat, fish, tubers, hung in woven nets from a wooden scaffold. The wind gnawed at the flesh, drawing out moisture until strips of frozen jerky clanged together like brittle shards of ice. Come midday, the sun peeked over the horizon, coaxing droplets of condensation from each meat shard, only for dusk to refreeze them. This daily freeze-thaw cycle created a jerky so tough it could double as an ice skate blade, but survival in the highlands demanded sacrifice, namely, your jaw. Meanwhile, downhill in marshy wetlands, enterprising hunters discovered the joy of bogging. They'd layer fish and eels between mats of reeds, trample the package underfoot to squeeze out air, then sink it in the murky waters. For weeks, the river's chill and anaerobic magic kept predators, in spoilage, at bay. Sure, a few unlucky souls braved the smell of fermented eel pudding, but that pungent tang meant sustenance when another mammoth remained a distant dream. It was the original community-supported agriculture. You drop your catch in the bog, you come back later for protein. If you forgot, well, congratulations on crafting the world's rankest marinade. But not every clan had the luxury of cold or bogs. Some adopted the subterranean solution, cellaring before cellars were cool. They'd hollow out earth mounds or dig pit silos, line them with stones or animal hides, and lower in crates of berries, roots, and roughly packaged meat. Into these ground vaults, they tossed a hefty smattering of ash or crushed charcoal to absorb odors and moisture. Then they sealed the entrance with clay and mud. The result? An earthen refrigerator, perfect for stretching a late summer harvest into the bleakness of winter. Of course, claustrophobics among the ranks resented crawling into holes for a quick snack, but necessity outweighs comfort when your staple diet is bug-infested larvae. In the tropics, where heat mocked preservation, tribes got creative with fermentation. Imagine a vat, actually a hollowed log, overflowing with chopped cassava and yams, misted with speckled rainwater teeming with airborne microbes. They'd let this slushy mash sit beneath banana leaves for days, stirring only when prayers to the fermentation spirits rang hollow. The resulting brew, called poi or kasiri depending on the region, smelled like foot fungus but provided calories and probiotics that modern wellness influencers would kill to bottle. It was a gamble. If the right bacteria won, you got nourishment. If not, well, there goes your last meal, and maybe a few fingers. Elsewhere, coastal clans veered into salt caves, natural caverns with walls encrusted in crystalline salt deposits. They'd fish at dawn, rub their hull in honey-rich tree sap, not for flavor alone, sugar also drew out moisture. Then layer the fish in hay mattresses strewn with salt shards. Sealed in the cave's cool, salty air, they waited for days as the sweet salt cured the flesh, turning ordinary fish into sea ham. The stink could peel paint, but it kept longer than any fresh catch in the open sun, and the communal salt cave became a sociable hub where gossip and preserved cod flourished in equal measure. Yet, none of these methods was bulletproof. Among the early pioneers of lactose experimentation, someone noticed that milk stored in animal stomach pouches congealed into curds and whey. They didn't know about rennet enzymes. They only knew that curdled milk kept longer than the liquid kind they'd suckled from their mammalian mothers. Thus, cheese was born, a wobbly, odoriferous delight that ranged from crumbly nuggets to gooey smear pots. The process was equal parts art and alchemy. A slightly different pouch, temperature, or holding time could yield anything from heavenly camembert to a green speckled horror that wilted the tongues of the timid. But when hunger struck, even the stinkiest cheese was manna. Peoples of the northern forests discovered resin-sealed food storage. They'd char the inside of birch bark containers, then lacquer them with sticky pine resin. Once set, these resin-lined vessels held meat, fish, or mushrooms in near airtight splendor. Open one, and you'd be greeted by a scent reminiscent of a lumberjack's cologne, piney, smoky, and surprisingly comforting. The resin not only sealed in moisture, but imbued the contents with antiseptic properties. The downside, accidentally eating a shard of hardened resin was a dental disaster. But when wolves prowled outside your hut, you appreciated that resin's protective barrier. Meanwhile, some tribes mediated a macabre partnership with scavengers. In East Africa, for instance, they observed vultures picking clean carcasses with uncanny efficiency. So they entrenched half-dead dromedaries in shallow pits, covered them with thorny branches to deter the vultures, and let nature partially decompose the flesh. Then humans would harvest the softened meat, cooking it over open flame to kill pathogens. This vulture method was neither glamorous nor polite, but it stretched resources when hunts were scarce. You might gag at the thought, but in those days, cultural sensitivity took a distant backseat to sheer caloric necessity. As clans migrated and mingled, knowledge of preservation methods journeyed with them. Silk Road merchants carried dried fruits, salted meats, and garum, a fermented fish sauce powerful enough to mask the stench of a dozen rotting carcasses. These goods commanded high prices, not merely for taste, but for the miraculous ability to survive desert sands and mountain passes. The elite dined on exotic cured delicacies, while common folk traded livestock for a taste of the preserved luxury. Garum, in particular, splashed from amphorae into bowls like molten gold, ancient umami paste that set tongues ablaze and preserved fish scraps that medieval palates valued above silver. And yet, amidst all this ingenious preservation, calamity lurked. A single misjudged fermentation could poison an entire village. Salt overuse left teeth pitted like a cobblestone street. Rancid smoked meats could host botulism long before it had a name. The cold, damp earth of subterranean stores invited fungal growth, leading to twisted, mycotoxin-infested tubers that weakened the boldest warrior. Clans kept ritual antidotes, herbal brews, chants, and shamanic dances to banish invisible spoilage demons. If someone fell ill after a bad batch of fish pretzels, the shaman's rattles and incense-laden chants provided psychological relief, plus a healthy dose of placebo. Fast forward to a windswept plateau at the edge of the world, where a small band of wanderers scratched out a living. They constructed an elaborate ice catacomb, a series of ice-lined crevasses beneath a glacier's edge. Each crevasse, insulated by layers of moss and animal hides, held sacks of grain, slabs of bone marrow, and hides filled with rendered fat. The temperature never budged above freezing, and the wind-whipped ice walls shimmered like blue glass. Visitors had to don sealskin boots and husk moccasins to retrieve food, lest a single wet foot become a frostbitten casualty. It was a marvel of primitive engineering, an ice bank that required no human electricity, yet it demanded fortitude. The cold bit like a vengeful spirit, and each foray risked collapse or hypothermia. Across the seas, island tribes innovated stone jar preservation. They'd carefully craft cylindrical containers from volcanic stone, seal them with coconut fiber lids coated in coconut oil, and pack layers of salted fish, lime leaves, and hot chilies. After weeks of mild heat and mild anaerobic conditions, the mixture transformed into a spicy sour condiment, an island cousin of garum. Each village passed down secret spice blends, turmeric from the highlands, wild peppercorns from coastal groves, or dried seaweed for extra umami. The result was a potent paste that spiced up bland staples and served as a preservative catalyst. In every corner of the globe, humans refused to surrender to spoilage. They harnessed smoke, sun, salt, earth, fermenting vats, and icy catacombs. They bartered secret recipes, hoarded salt like gold, and built fearsome cache houses with booby traps to ward off thieving neighbors or curious bears. They endured the blisters, nausea, and occasional death that accompanied experimental batches. They endured the rancid smells that clung to their homes, the mold that crept in like living wallpaper, the judicious sacrifices of taste and texture, all for one goal: to transform perishable bounty into reliable ration, to bridge the gap between feast and famine, to mock decay itself. And so, as the world tilts toward dawn and the wind carries the faint scent of yesterday's smoke, remember that every bag of potato chips, every can of soda, every Tupperware container pulsing with leftovers is the culmination of millennia of trial, error, and stubborn grit. Without our cave-bound forebears who wrestled with rot in its rawest form, our modern palates would be pitifully unprepared for the horror show of spoilage. They turned rancid danger into triumph, one charcoal-soaked slab at a time. So the next time your digital thermostat-controlled fridge hums softly, spare a thought, and maybe a quick mental salute, to the clan elder who first hung half-smoked mammoth above a smoldering fire, dared to touch the charred meat, and discovered that survival tastes surprisingly like irony. As dawn's pale fingers crept across the horizon, the clan roused itself from the crusty comfort of last night's ash-lined sleeping mounds. Part 3 of our saga begins not in the earliest cave, but amid the rise of civilization, where grain, wine, and bureaucracy collided in a glorious clash of preservation pandemonium. Imagine bustling Mesopotamian bazaars, choked with clouds of dust and the heady aroma of date wine fermenting in giant clay amphorae. Merchants in kilts embroidered with cuneiform symbols wheeled carts of salt bricks beside sacks of barley. Here, the food game leveled up. Gone were the simple sun-dried strips and bog beauties. Now elites hoarded silos, scribes recorded rations, and palace kitchens bred absurd excess. Yet without reliable preservation, even kings could starve. Stone granaries sprouted near ziggurats, towering storehouses sealed with bitumen to repel vermin. Workers armed with reed baskets and crude measuring rods funneled wheat into compartments stacked like upside-down pyramids. The heat baked the granaries to dessert temperatures. In that fiery oven, grains turned brittle, moisture fled, and fungal invaders found the walls impenetrable. But vigilance was mandatory. A single damp sack could spawn weevils the size of ants, and a moth reproduction could hollow out an entire clan's winter grain in a single night. Scribes logged daily inspections, an early Kafkaesque bureaucracy that ensured every kernel was counted, every infestation extinguished. Wine, that divine nectar of fermented grapes, became both commodity and preservative trick. Clay amphorae sealed with resinous pine pitch held the miracle elixir. But the ancients were plagued by wine sickness, a sour, vinegary fate when wild yeasts ran amok. Enter the garum-wary vintner, who learned to top off amphorae with olive oil, creating a slick barrier against air. Thus, ancient unophiles enjoyed semi-stable wine that could survive long caravans across the Fertile Crescent. The price was occasional cork-like off-flavors and a mouthfeel that screamed chemistry experiment. But beggars couldn't be choosers. In Egypt, where the Nile's floods dictated life, salt loomed as precious as gold. Workers harvested salt from evaporated lake beds, then drove it inland by donkey trains. Pharaohs instituted salt taxes, and salt became the currency of tooth-pitting poverty or savory prosperity. Meat and fish brined in salted water, sometimes enriched with date syrup for a sweet brine, hung in open-air smokehouses along the delta. The combination of salt, smoke, and scorching sun created a trifecta of preservation so effective that Herodotus marveled at salted sardines that supposedly outlasted entire dynasties. Of course, historians now suspect he overstated. Still, salt's power to yank moisture from flesh and slosh it into crystallized oblivion cannot be denied. Meanwhile, in the Indus Valley, artisans sculpted terracotta jars to cradle pickles, mangoes, limes, mustard seed. They layered fruit in oil and salt, pressing them under stone weights to coax out liquid. The fermenting mash bubbled beneath cloth covers, producing a pungent relish that paired with bland flatbreads. Each pot had its own microbial signature. Some families handled chilies with sizzling bravado. Others leaned on fenugreek's bittersweet tang. Pickles became lifelong obsessions. Travelers carried small gourd flasks of chutney elixir, swearing it saved their bowels on desert crossings. Little did they know it also helped stave off scurvy with its vitamin C boost. Journey westward into Bronze Age Crete, and you'll find labyrinthine storage rooms within palatial complexes. Like Knossos, where frescoed walls depicted minotaurs but likely hid piles of dried pulses. Greek scribes drafted rudimentary inventory lists on wax tablets, inscribing the number of olive oil jars, barley sacks, and cured hams. Pressed olive oil and amphorae created an anaerobic seal. Fish pressed into salted layers produced a sauce called gyros, a fish-based cousin of garum, that saturated walls of the palace with its funky aroma. Guests complained of breath that could fell goats, yet the sauce survived centuries of taverna evolution. As the Iron Age dawned, northern Europeans faced their own cold and wet conundrums. Dense forests and chilly climates rendered sun-drying moot, so Celts and Germanic tribes embraced heavy salting, burying meat trunks in bogs like the wetland curing of earlier eras, but innovated by adding wild herbs, juniper berries, bog myrtle, for flavor and slight antimicrobial benefits. They discovered that smoked bog butter, yes, butter, could survive months underground when stored in peat-lined pits, imparting a nutty, earthy tang. This aromatic treasure often emerged as coinage in elite gift exchanges, even though a whiff might clear a great hall faster than insults. Medieval Europe's monasteries crystallized preservation into near-religious ritual. Monks maintained herb gardens teeming with rosemary, thyme, and sage, plants revered for antiseptic oils. They documented recipes in illuminated manuscripts, how to imbue meat pies with vinegar, wine, and brine, how to combine dried fruits, sugar, as rare as salt once, and crush spices in dense fruit cakes that could last months and double as emergency. Ration bricks during pilgrimages. Take the Imperial Saxon monosodium tome. If you blend pork with honey, then store neath oiled cloth in a cool cellar. Lo, thy black pudding shall endure winter's chill. The margins danced with doodles of pigs wearing crowns. In the Byzantine Empire, food preservation became a strategic weapon. Imperial granaries stocked hardtack biscuits, plakontas, fortified with chickpea flour. These dense biscuits, baked until they resembled terracotta, survived long ships' voyages in siege conditions. Soldiers nibbling these rock-like crackers swore by them, though many resorted to dipping them in wine to soften their jaws. Meanwhile, merchants trafficked in saltfish, lacton, cured in brine pits near ports, which fed crews and coastal villages alike. The relentless conflict with Persians and Arabs elevated preserved rations to matters of state security. An army marching on ancient roads needed supply chains that defied rot and pillage. Crossing the Sahara, Tuareg and Berber caravans traversed desert heat with dried dates, cured camel meat, and millet cakes. They developed sealed leather flasks lined with fat to carry murky water without bacterial bloom. In the dunes, a dropped water bag spelled dehydration. Likewise, a failed date preservation meant energy-deficient collapse. These traders shared knowledge in desert oases. By a halting fire, they exchanged techniques. Hollowed gourds smoked under palm fronds, clay jars buried in sand, and pressed palm sugar slabs that served as sweeteners, hardtack, and emergency fuel. The age of exploration turned preservation into global commerce. European ships, needing months at sea supplies, stocked barrels of salted cod, the beloved bacalao from Newfoundland, hardtack from English bakehouses, and barrels of pickled vegetables to stave off scurvy, only partially successful, as even lime. Juice was poorly understood until much later. Sea captains entrusted boatswains to constantly sample barrels, tapping for spoilage. The dreaded ramp of ship's beef, salted ox, led to countless cases of dysentery and scurvy, yet sailors considered a mold-flocked barrel preferable to none. Back on shore, urbanization in Renaissance Europe spurred guilds of charcutiers. They produced coppa, prosciutto, and sausages named for every saint's day. Meat was rubbed with pepper, garlic, and salt, pressed in wooden molds, then hung in cold, drafty attics. Wealthy patrons flaunted cured meats on banquet tables, a symbol that they could afford both spice and time. The medieval infection control? Rendering hog lard into clarified fat and pouring it over pâté, forming a waxy seal. It looked like lumpy candle wax, but inside lay the promised pâté de foie gras, or at least something resembling liver-flavored candle. In the New World, indigenous peoples taught European colonists about smoking fish over greenwood fires and drying salmon on racks for months. Native Americans also fermented cassava into farofa and cooked manioc in clay pots to remove toxins. They wrapped meats in maize husks and buried them in earth ovens. The slow smolder turned tough cuts into tender morsels, and incidentally preserved them until the next hunt. Colonists stole these methods, hybridized them with old-world brining and pickling, and created a culinary melange that echoed in today's barbecue traditions. As industrialization rolled in, steamships, railroads, and canning transformed preservation yet again. Nicholas Apper's invention of sealed glass jars and high-heat sterilization birthed the age of tin can dinner. Suddenly, peas and pork and salty jelly defied seasons and distance. But canning's infancy was brutal. Poorly soldered tin lids leaked lead into stews, poisoning the most enthusiastic eaters. Factories belched steam and sweat. Workers hand-sealed cans under dim lamplight, unaware that a slight underheat could condemn entire batches to botulism hell. Throughout this period, through every empire and every humble homestead, one truth endured. Without preservation, civilization was a feast followed by famine's hangover. Each culture layered its own irony. Mashed fish fermented in the tropics, salt brine that pounded teeth in the north, smoke that choked eyes in every zone. Yet each innovation inched humanity farther from raw peril, and one step closer to a future where refrigerators hummed softly in kitchens, dutifully warding off the rancid horrors our ancestors faced daily. And so, as our third act closes, remember the grand tapestry of preservation. Ziggurats full of grain, amphorae brimming with resin-sealed wine, monks in frosty cellars curing hams, and explorers in scurvy-ridden holds clutching pickled cabbage. Each method reeked of risk, mold, rot, vaporized nutrients, and sometimes death. Yet these were the building blocks of empires, the fuel of voyages that circled the globe, and the secret recipes whispered in hearth-lit huts. Tomorrow, in Part 4, we'll sprint into the modern age, steam canneries, chemical preservatives, cold chain logistics, and finally, the near-infinite comfort of our electric iceboxes. Always bearing in mind that every chill rack of groceries owes its existence to the smoky, salty, fermented labors of our stalwart, absurd, and ever-resilient forebears. As the sun of innovation rose over the 19th century, humanity hurled itself into a rapid-fire revolution of preservation that would have left our cave-dwelling ancestors both aghast and awestruck. Steam hissed in canneries as inventors raced to bottle the bounty of oceans, fields, and orchards. No longer did survival depend solely on smoke, salt, or sun. Centrifugal force, sterilizing heat, and airtight metal cans became the new alchemy. Yet for all its brilliance, this age of canning was as chaotic as a cave party with mammoth stew gone wrong. Imagine a sprawling factory floor in 1875, where workers, mostly women and children, lined long benches manually ladling stew or fruit compote into tin cans. Each seam was hand-soldered, often under flickering gaslight. Some cans emerged sealed with pristine precision, others leaked, corroded, or worse, housed invisible spores of botulism. Rumors of toxic tins circulated in townships as families nervously tapped their dinner cans, listening for ominous echoes. A miscalibrated steam bath could leave bacteria unscathed, leading to mysterious stomach collapses that public health officials struggled to explain. Yet, demand soared. Canned sardines and corned beef became staples for railroads, military rations, and immigrant households craving the flavors of home. Simultaneously, sugar, once an elite condiment, plummeted in price thanks to colonial plantations and the brutal exploitation of enslaved labor. Jam and jelly production skyrocketed. Entire town fairs became spectacles of marmalade contests where bragging rights hinged on a perfect gel. Not too runny, not too stiff. Women boiled down bushels of berries with pounds of sugar, spooning the molten mixture into mason jars, some jars sealed with a satisfying pop that felt like sweet victory. Others refused to vacuum lock, resulting in mold colonies that bloomed like botanical nightmares at the back of pantries. But even spoiled jelly felt preferable to the grim alternatives of decay that our ancestors endured. As canneries belched steam and sugar cauldrons hissed, chemistry labs across Europe and America locked themselves away in scent-laden rooms, conjuring synthetic preservatives. Lab coats dusted off Petri dishes of bacteria as chemists experimented with formaldehyde, benzoates, and nitrates. Early experiments in chemical preservation sometimes sounded better on paper than in practice. A dash of industrial benzoic acid could arrest yeast activity, but also left a metallic aftertaste that made jam resemble hand sanitizer. Sodium nitrite turned meats a healthy rosy pink, hiding the telltale gray of spoilage, a cosmetic triumph but a nutritional gamble, as later generations would discover links to cancers. Yet the promise of week-long shelf lives and travel-friendly foods was intoxicating enough to overshadow the whispers of potential harm. Meanwhile, the advent of railroads and steamships forged the first true cold chains. Refrigerated railcars, crammed with blocks of ice harvested from northern lakes, chugged through sweltering summers, transporting peaches, strawberries, and cream from farm to city. In South America's pampas, refrigerated holds on British beef steamers ensured steaks arrived in European ports as pink and unmarred as they had left the ranch. City dwellers who once endured the horrors of gamey kangaroo or rancid salmon now chomped into succulent beef fillets shipped thousands of miles, all thanks to a precarious network of ice houses, insulators, and iron rails, an international game of thermodynamic Jenga. By the early 20th century, the refrigerator as we know it crept into suburban kitchens. Electric compressors hummed in back rooms, promising year-round freshness. Housewives gazed into neatly arranged shelves of milk, butter, and leftovers, no longer relegated to the bristly brink of expiration. Gone were the days of meat luridly sealed in fat. Now every scrap sat under controlled temperatures, bathed in artificial light. Still, early fridge owners discovered new nightmares: rogue mold spores that grew in hidden crevices, plastic drawers that warped, and motors that sputtered. Many recalled tales of entire summer picnics, poisoned by a forgotten potato salad, sealed behind a decade's worth of mustard jars. As domestic refrigeration proliferated, urban sprawl transformed into zones of perpetual chill. Grocery stores doubled as cold warehouses, their aisles humming with freezers stacked high with frozen dinners, ice cream tubs, and peas that snapped like fresh picks, until January 8th of the following year, when the package's tiny print decreed them past prime. Supermarkets instituted barcodes, sell-by dates, and promotions to steer consumers away from spoilage. But this abundance bred complacency. Piled high perishables were tossed daily in dumpsters, a verdant monument to waste in the name of safety and modern convenience. Consumers, once intimate with their food's life cycle, slipped into dependency on best buy stamps. Packaged snacks bristled with artificial preservatives, BHA, BHT, calcium propionate, chemical wardens guarding against mold and rancidity. Bread could sit unspoiled for weeks, its carton still soft, but at what cost? Health experts began to finger these compounds as possible carcinogens, digestive disruptors, and allergy triggers. The invisible battle between microbes and man moved from smoky caves into the petri dishes of corporate labs, with each side arming itself in chemical warfare. Meanwhile, giant industrial freezers in warehouses and logistics hubs expanded the concept of the cold chain into a global frigid lattice. Frozen seafood from Norwegian trawlers, mangoes from Thailand, and lamb from New Zealand found their way into even the most remote corners of the world. Containers, each a half-mile of chilling coils, sailed oceans, passed through ports, and journeyed across continents, precisely monitored for the slightest temperature drift. A single spike above -18 degrees Celsius could thaw the crust, awakening hidden pathogens. A cold chain glitch could turn a container of blueberries into a microscopic battleground of salmonella. Ensuring an unbroken chain of sub-zero terror became an engineering obsession. In the latter half of the 20th century, microwave ovens promised to revolutionize the rewarming of preserved foods. Lunchboxes crackled with steam from defrosted lasagna rolls. TV dinners, each in its segmented aluminum tray, leapt from freezer to plate in 90 seconds. Yet microwave convenience introduced new pitfalls. Bacteria lurking in cold spots, plastic packaging leaching chemicals when zapped, and an insidious dumbing down of culinary skills. Generation after generation grew increasingly detached from the visceral reality of food spoilage, trusting technology to neutralize every microbial grenade. And then came the era of high-tech preservation. Modified atmosphere packaging, MAP, flushed out oxygen and replaced it with nitrogen or carbon dioxide to slow aerobic microbes. Ethylene scavengers in fruit cartons extended shelf life. ultraviolet, light tunnels zapped passing lettuce leaves, ozone showers sanitized meat carcasses. Molecular gastronomy chefs even toyed with sous vide cooking, vacuum sealing meat in plastic pouches, then cooking them in temperature-controlled water baths to both preserve and perfect texture. Food science had become an art of preserving freshness itself, a grand inversion of rot. Yet with every leap forward there merged an underbelly of dependency and fragility. A cyber attack on a cold storage network could paralyze supply chains. Natural gas shortages threatened compressor function. Single-use plastics proliferated as packaging monsters. Ice packs, flow wraps, shrink sleeves choked waterways with microplastics. Meanwhile, global warming foreshortened winters, shrank natural ice reserves, and pushed refrigerated transport to run on ever more polluting fuel. The modern convenience of crisp lettuce in July came at the price of complex logistics and an industrial appetite that made prehistoric smokehouses seem downright rustic. In the early 21st century, the farm-to-table movement emerged as an ironic rebellion against the labyrinth of cold chains. Artisanal producers resurrected ancient techniques, lacto-fermentation, dry curing, wood smoking, and clay pot storage, celebrating the very same methods our cavemen forebears pioneered. Local co-ops built root cellar garages and pop-up pickling bars sprouted in hip urban neighborhoods. Millennials flaunted jars of kombucha and kimchi on TikTok, unaware that these humble ferments echoed a survival instinct as old as fire. They lamented industrial flavor, yet embraced acid tang and moldy rind as hallmarks of authenticity. At the same time, cutting-edge startups promised to supplant refrigeration altogether, edible wax coatings to extend fruit shelf life, nanocapsules that release antimicrobial peptides, graphene-based packaging that senses spoilage and lights up with a warning. Bioplastics enriched with cellulose from agricultural waste sought to replace harmful wraps. Cold plasma jets deodorized and disinfected without water or chemicals, and even lab-grown meat, cultured in sterile bioreactors, arrived in vacuum-sealed pouches, ready to be fried, grilled, or sliced into deli slices that never spoiled in transit. But despite all the wizardry, one inescapable truth persists. Preservation remains a gamble with entropy. Microbes mutate, climate shifts, supply chains fracture, and consumer tastes oscillate between the hyper-processed and the primal. Every innovation yields new risks: allergies to packaging materials, antibiotic resistance in meat, energy preferences that strain power grids. The apotheosis of convenience sometimes masks the same brutal calculus our ancestors faced. Remove moisture, limit air, inhibit decay, and you eat. Fail, and you suffer. The difference lies in scale, complexity, and the legal liability that forces modern producers to plaster warnings in microscopic font across shiny labels. And now, as you stare into your refrigerator's soft glow, its shelves lined with takeout boxes, artisanal cheese logs, and tofu tubs, remember that this silent hum conceals centuries of struggle. Each sealed pouch, frozen block, and vacuum-packed pouch is a monument to ingenuity, a triumph over the relentless march of rot. It's a testament to boiling cauldrons of primordial brew, to the acrid bite of wood smoke, to the briny sting of salt rubbed raw. It's also a reminder that convenience carries a hidden cost: the energy that powers compressors, the plastic that clogs oceans, the chemical byproducts that linger in our bodies. Our ancestors once wrestled spoilage by building smoldering fires at cave mouths and hanging meat in sunlit jerky lines. Today we trust chips of metal, Byzantine logistics, and synthetic preservatives to safeguard our daily sustenance. Yet the primal pain of hunger, the dread of a spoiled meal, and the raw exhilaration of a well-preserved feast still pulsate beneath modern comforts. Every time you unwrap a prepackaged snack or crack open a can, you reenact millennia of trial, error, and unflinching will to survive. So take a moment now to honor the smoky haze of prehistory, the crusted salt pits of antiquity, the steam-suffused canneries of the Industrial Revolution, and the humming caverns of refrigerated logistics. With each bite, you partake in a grand, absurd saga of human tenacity, a saga that started when our forebears hung half-smoked mammoth by a flickering flame and continues today in every chilled grocery aisle. In a world fleeing entropy at breakneck speed, let's not forget how we got here. By embracing the stink, the burn, the mold, and the micropathogens, and ultimately conquering them, one preserved morsel at a time. Picture this. Dawn breaks over a frost-cracked plain, a frantic howl shatters the morning hush, and you stumble out of your rock-hewn shelter to find your best hunter collapsed in a pool of his own blood, his legs split open by a rogue bison horn. No ambulances, no bandages, just bone, brine-sweet air, and a clan's collective panic in full swing. They say survival of the fittest, but when your comrade is bleeding out, fittest feels like the cruelest prank the universe ever played. Welcome to the Pleistocene emergency room, where cavemen address sickness and injury with a cocktail of superstition, desperate resourcefulness, and more pain than a root canal performed by a rhinoceros. Before the crack of dawn's first light, shamans, part medicine man, part exasperated middle manager, would be chivied from their moss-lined alcove by a chorus of frantic relatives. Armed with sharpened flint, charred bones, and a handful of knotted sinew, they approached each injury like it was the final boss in a brutally primitive video game. The first order of business: stop the bleeding. In the absence of gauze or modern compression, they plastered wounds with a paste of crushed mugwort and venom-neutralizing clay gathered from riverbanks where the earth curled rich and red. Mugwort, legendary as both antiseptic and hallucinogen, often prompted feverish hallucinations for both patient and healer, but at least it stung less than raw sea urchin spines. Imagine the scene: the hunter's back hunched over a stone slab, legs bound by strips of hide, as his kin held him down like a sacrificial goat. A few straw-stiff branches propped open the gaping flesh. You could see sinews fraying like ancient rope. The shaman, wearing a headdress of raven feathers, began chanting a guttural incantation, half prayer, half profanity, summoning spirits both benign and dread. Then came the paste, gritty and cold, forced into the wound with sticks carved to look like jagged tongues. Miraculously, blood slowed. Not because of any sterile miracle, but because the clay swelled to block capillaries and the hide strips pressed tight, turning flesh into a pressurized alarm bell. Once the immediate crisis passed, infection loomed like a hungry saber-tooth. To beat it back, shamans brewed decoctions from willow bark, nature's aspirin, boiling twigs until the water turned bitter as bile. They added yarrow for its coagulating properties and a dash of crushed garlic bulbs, prized for antimicrobial punch. The hunter was compelled to swallow these elixirs, grimacing as the bitter brew clawed down his throat, but any relief was worth the hellish sip. The clan's younglings were tasked with keeping vigil, scooping spoonfuls of the brew into his mouth every sunrise and sunset, while the mothers fanned smoke from burning juniper branches over his head to purify the air. Fever was another enemy altogether. When illness struck, maybe from spoiled mammoth meat or a parasite wriggling unseen in a waterhole, the clan's version of triage was mangled but earnest. The patient was plopped on a bed of fresh ferns and moss, carefully chosen for their cooling, moisture-wicking properties. Leaves of elderflower, known to reduce fevers, were pounded into poultices and pressed against hot temples, the cold leaf matter drawing heat like an open wound draws flies. Bodies dripping sweat were occasionally dunked into icy rivers, the shock intended to reset horrid fevers, though more than one stricken soul almost drowned mid-spasm. For bone breaks, there was no orthopedic cast or x-ray. Instead, the shaman inspected the bend with a practiced grimace, often loud enough to disrupt the nearby mammoth hunt. Then, using a pair of polished antler splints, they set the bone by brute force. Clan members held down the patient's screaming limbs, grunting with the effort, while the shaman crammed splints along the length of the break and lashed them with dried sinew pulled taut. Any slack would mean a misaligned fracture that couldn't carry weight. Too tight and the flesh would blacken from constricted blood flow. Once wrapped in leather strips, the limb was propped in a crutch-like support fashioned from tree branches. The patient hobbled away, cursing fate and gravity in equal measure. Natural childbirth was a rite both miraculous and macabre. Midwives, women hardened by countless births and the smell of raw life, guided expectant mothers through the agony without painkillers, beyond bitter herbs and slippery animal fats for lubrication. When bleeding threatened postpartum survivors, they stuffed wounds with moss soaked in toasted nettle tea, believing the nettle's sting would shock the uterus back into place. Infants emerging covered in gore were smacked gently on the rump, sometimes too roughly, intended to clear their lungs but occasionally causing concussions that laid the newborn out cold. The women of the clan chanted lullabies laced with promises to the moon goddess, hoping divine mercy would bless both mother and child. Smallpox-like pustules and unknown diseases spread like wildfire in cramped caves. Lacking quarantine protocols, sick clansmen were sometimes isolated on cave ledges where wind blasted them into delirium. Families left water and scraps at the entrance, but scavengers and birds often beat them to the feast. Some shamans believed isolation offered spirits a quiet realm in which to negotiate death, while others left dying members to drift into the darkness. A grim mercy killing whipped up by desperation. Mental illness was another riddle. Anyone whose behavior veered too far off the known spectrum, talking to trees, jesting with rocks, or howling for wolves at midnight, risked becoming a sacrifice to ward off clan-wide misfortune. Shamans performed spirit exorcisms, drilling tiny holes in the skull with flint awls to release evil spirits. The trepanation left patients vulnerable to infection, but a few survived, bearing circular scars that became badges of mystical status. Others succumbed to sepsis, their fate a grim reminder that medicine without adequate sanitation was a gamble where 3 of every 4 died. Amputation of gangrenous limbs was a last resort, performed with a cold precision that would make modern surgeons wince. Affected limbs were placed over a fire to char the flesh and cauterize tissue before the shaman swung an obsidian blade in a single swift cut. The smell of burning flesh mingled with the acrid snap of sinew. The patient screamed through gritted teeth while kin bound the stump with thick layers of fat and ash to staunch bleeding. Remarkably, some of these patients survived, hobbling on club legs fashioned from hardwood, though phantom pains may have haunted them for life. When the hunter finally survived, weeks turned into months of recovery. The clan crafted crude mobility aids, stone benches hewn from outcrops, low branches carved into cradles, and poles balanced like scaffolding for limping journeys. They plastered wounds with honey when windows of infection threatened to reopen. Honey's sugar load created osmotic barriers that repelled microbes. Remarkably, honey from wild bees often proved more reliable than clay paste, though every drop felt like liquid gold in the arid caves. Psychological healing relied on communal rituals. Victorious return from injury prompted feasts where the healed hunter was paraded on a litter of furs, his wounds still crusted but his status elevated. Songs recounted his bravery and the shaman's skill, soothing survivors' guilt and reinforcing clan unity. The feast itself was a ceremony in gratitude to spirits of earth and sky, offering the first bites of roasted marrow and gruel seasoned with wild sage. Children learned these rites as formative theater, how to bind a sprained wrist with grass, how to recognize poisonous mushrooms by the bitter sting on the tongue, and the futility of a broken heart if you ignored the shaman's warnings. They practiced on woven dolls, stuffing them with clay and red dyes to simulate wounds, laying them on flat stones beneath the open sky. These rehearsals, full of joking curses and mock screams, imbued each young member with the collective knowledge that survival hinged on communal care, however rudimentary. In the harsh epics of prehistory, our ancestors were surgeons, pharmacists, midwives, and counselors rolled into one. Their tools were clay, bone, sinew, smoke, and song. They were craftsmen of life's edge, improvising in the shadows of extinction. Their failures were brutal, festering infections, misaligned limbs, and bodies marred by ritual drills. Yet their persistence carved the foundation of every modern hospital wing and pharmacy aisle. So next time you gripe about waiting in an ER or choking down bitter medicine, spare a thought for the dawn of human healthcare, where the only alternative to the shaman's knotted incense was the cold void of an unmarked grave. Cavemen didn't have ER codes or malpractice suits. They had sheer will, a trembling patient, and the tools at hand. And against the odds, they patched up enough of us that here you are, scrolling through a video script about them, grateful that your worst injury today might be a paper cut. As the hunter's boisterous return feast settles into a murmur, and the embers of birchwood fires wane, the clan faces the slower trials of convalescence, those long, aching days when flesh knits and spirits fray. With the immediate crisis past, attention turns to long-term care, stimulating appetite, preventing atrophy, and guarding against the creeping dread of re-injury. In the absence of broth that bubbles for hours or cushioned hospital beds, recovery relied on a combination of lean protein gruel, painstaking massage, and the occasional horror show of therapeutic pain. Vermin-ridden caves reeked of stale air, but fresh breezes came at a price: exposure. For weeks the wounded hunter lay on a wooden pallet, raised on stone pillars to deter rodents and snakes. Clan nurses, usually elderly women with hands as gnarled as tree roots, arranged mats of aromatic herbs beneath him to mask stench and discourage insects. Lavender and yarrow weren't just pleasant aromas. They harbored volatile oils that repelled flies and may have slowed pestilent larvae. When the hunter's fever flickered back like a stubborn candle, they hunted damp leaves of trefoil and calendula, crushing them into poultices that, when applied to hot skin, delivered relief even if tinged with a sting. Maintaining nutrition became a delicate art. Solid food risked tearing fragile flesh or dislodging scabs, yet liquids alone left muscles wasted and morale bankrupt. The clan improvised clay sip cups, fashioned from broken pottery shards, a rough rim smoothed by hot stones. Into these they poured thin broths, boiled marrow from fractured bones, crushed ground nuts for oils, and gleanings of foraged tubers mashed into a starchy slurry. The hunter gulped through a reed straw, minimizing contact between brittle teeth and bone shards. Occasionally, brave children sprinkled crushed dried berries atop the gruel to coax sweetness, though too much sugar threatened dysentery. Meanwhile, mobility demanded invention. As scar tissue tightened, limbs stiffened, and sedentary convalescence bred cramps. Young warriors drilled the hunter in gentle stretching rituals. Guided prods of sinew-bound splints, assisted flexes of stiff joints, and rotations of broken wrists. Support poles, straight hazel branches carved smooth, became makeshift parallel bars. The hunter hobbled between them, swaying like a reed in a storm, each step a testament to grit. When setbacks occurred, often triggered by a misstep on slick cave floors, the clan gathered in tense silence, hearts pounding as they measured new wounds for bleeding or infection. Every tear of flesh restarted the cycle of clay, sinew, and bitter herb brews. As bones knitted over months, the clan recognized the deeper toll: loneliness. Illness isolated even in tight-knit groups. To combat despair, shamans conducted shared vision ceremonies around dusk's blue glow. The hunter lay supine on furs, his bandaged arm extended as the shaman chanted trance rhythms against the drum of hollowed elk hide. Smoke from juniper and sage curled in spirals above him, believed to carry prayers to ancestral spirits. Clan members circled in silence, passing talismans, polished river stones, carved bone amulets over the wound. Each touch symbolized collective strength, a vow that his pain was theirs, shared across flesh and bone. Where the hunter's injury had been tangible, sickness presented invisible terrors. In part 1, we saw fevers and parasites, but now the clan faced dreaded epidemics: dysentery from contaminated water, skin lesions from scabies mites, and coughing fits hinting at early tuberculosis. There were no quarantine wards or antiseptic wipes, only the grim calculus of sacrifice. In small clans, one sick individual threatened all. An outbreak could decimate a group in days. The remedy was forced migration. The entire clan would pack up, leaving contaminated shelters behind, moving to fresh caves or open plains. The sick were carried on stretchers of woven reeds, jostling in the wind as each cough echoed like a death knell. In these nomadic evacuations, knowledge sharing became vital. Adjacent clans, bound by uneasy truces or marriage ties, exchanged tips. One tribe praised the bitter bark of dogwood as a vermifuge. Another preached the virtues of fermented honeymead to kill intestinal worms. Shamans gathered at muddy watering holes, trading powders and pastes. Some concocted sulfurous poultices from heated sulfur nodules, an antimicrobial gambit that soothed raw skin but stung like hell. Others advocated clay inhalations, drying fine red earth over hot coals and inhaling the dust, believing it cleansed the lungs. The effect on nascent respiratory infections was uncertain, but the ritual itself reinforced communal bonds and the illusion of control. Wounds that refused to heal spawned legends. A hunter with a chronic gouge on his thigh became a living cautionary tale. His limp, a relentless reminder of mortality, drew pity and admiration. Pregnant women sought blessings from him, believing that his survival heralded fertility and strength. His scar, raw and pink beneath failing scar tissue, was an emblem of defiance. Visitors left offerings, carved figurines of bison, stones painted with ochre, and seed packets of wildflowers they hoped might sprout along the trails. In a surprising twist, these injured survivors morphed into spiritual guardians, their bodies temples to the fragility of life. When children fell ill, chickenpox, measles, or fevers that raged in tiny chests, the clan's maternal cohort enacted infant triage. There were no pediatric wards. Mothers held babies close to share warmth, rocking them in cradle boards woven from reeds. Breastfeeding was prolonged, both for nutrition and immune support. Each mother swore her milk carried ancestral antibodies. For teething pain or mouth sores, toddlers gnawed on chilled deer, antler points dipped in nettle tea, a method that numbed gums and coaxed fresh sap from bitter plants thought to cleanse saliva channels. Feverish toddlers, cheeks streaked with sweat and tears, were doused in lather of crushed mint leaves, an early form of cooling balm. As adolescents grew, they apprenticed under elder caregivers. They learned to recognize subtle signs, the specific sheen of a bad fever blister, the hollow sound of an abscess ready to burst, the telltale clamminess signaling sepsis. Apprentices carried bundles of mice nests and spider webs, ignoble materials used as primitive sutures or wound dressings. Spider silk, prized for its tensile strength, was woven across shallow cuts like foreign-born stitches. As gruesome as it sounds, some wounds closed cleaner and faster under these natural ligatures than with sinew. In battle or hunting mishaps, chest punctures were near-death sentences. The clan devised improvisational air seal methods, sealing small holes with smears of pine resin, heated until runny, then plastering them over with animal fat. This crude, buttressing technique bought time, preventing lungs from collapsing completely. Breathing remained shallow and painful, yet several individuals survived thoracic wounds by coughing deliberately to expel trapped air and re-expand lung tissue. Their ragged breath became a badge of honor, a testament to bodily resilience. Mental anguish from trauma demanded attention too. After witnessing gore, whether from a bison charge or a clan member's grisly fall, survivors endured nightmares that punctured sleep like barbed spears. In response, shamans crafted dream catchers of woven grasses and eagle feathers, inspired by the fluttering patterns of prey in flight. Hung above sleeping pallets, these charms supposedly filtered out bad dreams, though the true therapy lay in communal storytelling. Each night, survivors gathered to recite the day's events in exaggerated, almost comedic tones, turning fearsome, buffalo gore into slapstick choreographies. Laughter, while unlikely to cure broken bones, soothed fracturing psyches. As seasons turned, the clan established rudimentary aids for reintegration. Hunters recovering from partial blindness, whether from smoke lung or ocular infection, learned to track game by sound and scent. They carried hand-carved rattles that mimicked bird calls, training beasts closer within spear range. Others, rendered deaf by head trauma or infection, found new roles as fire tenders or basket weavers, their remaining senses directing their tasks. The clan's flexibility in reassigning roles ensured every member remained valuable, regardless of physical limitations. By the time spring's first buds pried open the earth, the stricken hunter from our opening scene had journeyed from near death to grudging vitality. His gait was still uneven, each step accompanied by that low, bone-deep ache that only a healed fracture can provide. Yet he returned to the hunt, spear in hand, not as the fastest but as a symbol. If he could survive the bison's horn and sepsis and months of bitter gruel, then the untested youth had no excuse to falter. His clan, once timid around his wounds, now venerated him, his scars the canvas on which they painted stories of endurance. In these moment-to-moment struggles, our caveman ancestors established truths we still echo today. That healing is a communal endeavor, requiring not only tools and tinctures but storytelling, empathy, and adaptation. They improvised splints from sticks, stitched skins with sinew, brewed bitter teas from bark, and coaxed each other through the dark nights of infection and fear. Their victories were small: a bone that set correctly, a fever broken, a child who survived full pox. And each victory carried the same refrain: we heal together or we perish alone. Long before modern hospitals, our forebears laid the foundations of triage, convalescence, and compassionate care. Their methods lacked sterile gowns, antibiotics, and painkillers, but they compensated with resourcefulness forged in necessity and rituals steeped in communal healing. They demanded that the clan share not only labor but grief, not only medicine but stories. And in that crucible of hardship, they discovered an immutable truth. Beyond the flint blades and clay paste, it was empathy, the willingness to cradle a fevered head, to share a precious scrap of food, to hold a trembling hand that stitched flesh and soul together. Today, when we click through telemedicine apps or stroll into climate-controlled clinics, we owe a debt to those moss-lined caves, smoke-heavy chambers, and bone-rattling rituals. They turned the agony of injury and illness into the art of survival, weaving science and ritual into a tapestry of care. Their lives were brutish, short, and often barbaric by modern standards, but their spirit lives on in every bandage we wrap, every fever we break, and every hand we hold through the darkest nights of healing. Let's take a moment and imagine this scenario. You've just survived a bear mauling. Your leg is a mosaic of punctures, your arm is dangling like a broken reed, and your ribcage feels like it's been stomped by a mammoth. Naturally you think, this is it. The clan gathers, ready to say their final goodbyes. But wait, instead of giving you the luxury of a dramatic fade-out, they decide, no, you're gonna live, because they need you. There are only 9 adult males left, and the saber-toothed tiger population isn't exactly declining. So buckle up, because it's time for aggressive prehistoric rehabilitation. Now, we've already seen the basics: splints, poultices, smelly herb stews, and public shaming to encourage resilience. But the real horror begins when the clan decides that healing must be accelerated. Why? Because winter is coming, and they don't want to waste valuable mammoth fat on a guy who isn't at least mobile. Enter prehistoric physical therapy, which is less gentle stretching and more survive the pain or die trying. First, the mobility circle. The injured were literally placed in the center of a circle, surrounded by clan members armed with sticks. Not for violence, of course, just encouragement. The idea was to stand, walk, or crawl out of the circle. If you couldn't, well, the sticks poked you a little, lightly, persistently, all out of love, of course. This practice had a name, crawl of shame. Though scholars dispute the translation, some believe it was more accurately the test of worth, or stop being lazy and get up. Next came the hot stone massage. Picture this: flat river stones heated in fire until they glowed faintly red, then wrapped in wet bark and applied directly to muscles. The goal? Relaxation. The result? Burns. But somehow, amidst the pain and sizzling, the hunter's seized muscles loosened, or possibly his nervous system gave up entirely. Either way, it was considered a success. To quote one elder's favorite phrase, pain leaving the body is weakness dying. Coincidentally, so did many patients. Now, as wounds slowly healed and the injured regained some movement, there was one glaring problem. Hygiene. Infection was never far away, and the clan's version of clean involved cold streams, sand, and a prayer to the gods of rot. Bandages, typically made of rabbit fur or soft bark, were changed daily, and by changed we mean ripped off with zero notice. This was called airing the wound. The idea was to expose the healing skin to sunlight and good spirits, though it mostly resulted in shrieking and a few well-placed kicks at whoever dared approach with the bark. But infection was a real and terrifying threat. Pus was seen as a bad spirit escaping the body. To encourage this, wounds were sometimes deliberately reopened with fishbone needles to let the evil out. Again, no antiseptic, no anesthesia, just sharp tools and the belief that suffering was part of the process. The shamans chant during this process, something akin to better out than in, which frankly could be the motto of prehistoric medicine. And then there was the ritual of smoke cleansing. Once a week, the entire convalescence chamber, aka the darkest part of the cave, was filled with smoke from burning juniper, pine, and mystery herbs that definitely caused hallucinations. The smoke was believed to purify the air and scare off diseased spirits. In reality, it caused coughing fits and occasional fainting. The patient had 2 options: breathe deeply and risk asphyxiation, or hold your breath and risk being accused of hiding demons in your lungs. Sometimes the cure was worse than the disease. Take, for example, their method for treating migraines. No, They didn't offer willow bark tea, which had mild analgesic properties. Instead, they drilled small holes into the skull using sharpened flint. Yes, trepanation. The logic was simple. If your head hurt, there was pressure. If there was pressure, you needed to let it out. Amazingly, some people survived this procedure and lived long enough to regret it. What about broken teeth? Ah yes, dental care in the Stone Age, a special flavor of nightmare. Teeth were essential for survival, and a rotting molar could become a death sentence. The solution? Extraction, caveman style. First, numbing via cold water. Next, a rock. Finally, one brave soul yanked the tooth using a combination of brute force and animal sinew tied around the offending enamel. If you were lucky, the tooth came out. If you weren't, so did several neighbors. Toothaches were such a common ailment that toothless elders were venerated for their battle scars and given honorary roles as soup tasters. Now let's talk mental illness. Did cavemen get depressed? Absolutely. If you watched your clanmate get eaten by a wolf, your shelter collapse, and your food supply disappear all in the same week, you'd probably feel down too. But without words like anxiety or depression, they had to interpret mental distress differently. Most commonly, possession. Yes, if you were withdrawn, sleepless, or irritable, the shaman assumed a spirit had taken up residence in your head. The treatment? Not gentle therapy. More like an exorcism via cold water dunking, loud drumming, and being forced to chase your spirit into the woods. The belief was that running until exhaustion could shake loose the entity. Unsurprisingly, this sometimes worked, not because the spirit left, but because sheer fatigue can numb most feelings. If that failed, they prescribed laughter medicine, the clan's version of stand-up comedy, where the afflicted were mocked relentlessly in hopes they'd laugh so hard the spirit would get bored and leave. Some cases, of course, were more severe, especially those involving hallucinations, violent outbursts, or catatonia. For these poor souls, the cave had a quiet zone, a shallow pit lined with moss and guarded by a chosen elder. There, the person would be kept warm, fed minimal food, and subjected to hours of chanting. It wasn't cruel by their standards. It was the best they could offer. The patient's fate depended largely on time and luck. Some recovered, some vanished into the woods, and some became shamans themselves, their madness interpreted as spiritual insight. And what of childbirth? Surely cavemen had a handle on that? Well, handle is a strong word. Childbirth was a high-stakes gamble. Women gave birth squatting over pits lined with soft leaves. Midwives, experienced mothers, offered guidance, herbal tea, and chewed sticks for biting during labor. Pain relief? Ha! The prevailing belief was that pain was a test from the earth goddess, and that crying out too loudly might offend her. Many women died. Those who survived were celebrated with days of feasting, storytelling, and gifts of fur or tools. Newborns were immediately rubbed with animal fat to seal in life, and wrapped tightly in dried bark for warmth. When infants got sick, it was pure improvisation. Colic was treated with warm stone compresses on the belly, fevers with cold water and frantic prayers. If a child survived past age 5, it was considered a miracle. And for those who didn't, burial involved tiny cairns of stone, offerings of berries, and a period of mourning marked by silence and face painting with ash. As we conclude this harrowing tour of prehistoric healthcare, one thing becomes clear. Cavemen were tough, not by choice, but by necessity. They bled, they screamed, they healed or didn't, without anesthesia, antibiotics, or even the basic understanding of germs. Yet somehow, they carried on. They turned every injury into a story, every sickness into a shared trial, and every scar into a badge of honor. Their lives were short, brutal, and often absurd, but their resilience paved the way for every bandage, vaccine, and ibuprofen tablet we take for granted today. They didn't have hospitals. They had caves, sticks, herbs, and sheer willpower. And when someone got sick or injured, they didn't ask, will he survive? They asked, how hard are we willing to fight to keep him alive? And often, that fight was enough. Let's say you've survived a rough winter. Your wounds from that saber-toothed tiger attack have mostly healed. The shaman stopped chanting directly into your face. Life is, for once, peaceful. Then, the fever hits. And not just you, half the clan starts coughing, sweating, and muttering incoherently about seeing mammoths fly. That's right, Welcome to the prehistoric plague, the original group project no one signed up for. Now, cavemen didn't understand the word plague, but they did understand the signs: mass sickness, rapid decline, and a general aura of doom. What did they blame? Bad spirits, of course. Or maybe a cursed rock. Or perhaps the fact that someone accidentally ate that very suspicious mushroom last week, and now the gods are angry. Regardless of cause, the response was always the same: containment. And by containment, we mean exile. If you showed symptoms, fever, rash, random screaming, you were gently encouraged, dragged to the sick cave, located far enough from the main camp to ensure no one would catch your death. There, the sick huddled together under blankets made of discarded animal hides, trying not to freeze or hallucinate too loudly. The shaman visited once a day, bringing mystery stew and muttering curses at nearby squirrels, who might have also been spirits in disguise. Let's talk plague treatments. First, sweating it out. The patient was covered in hot stones, wrapped in furs, and left to cook like a prehistoric lasagna. The belief? Sweat would purge illness. The result? Dehydration and the occasional spontaneous nudity as patients fled the heat. If you survived, you were hailed as a hero. If not, well, more space in the sick cave. Then came bloodletting, but with a twist. Without metal tools, cavemen used sharpened shells or flint to release bad blood. This practice was especially popular for fevers, headaches, or general crankiness. Did it help? Probably not. Did it make everyone feel like they were doing something productive? Absolutely. Plus, it gave the shaman a dramatic flair as he danced around, flinging drops of blood and howling at the moon. When bloodletting failed, there was always leech therapy. Yes, they found these squishy little water monsters and thought, let's stick them on sick people. Why? Because leeches were thought to suck out evil. Fun fact, sometimes they used leeches found on rotting logs. Extra evil sucking power, apparently. Bonus fun fact, those leeches often caused infection. But hey, at least it was a distraction from the fever. And then there was herbal fumigation, a process where dried herbs, usually the ones that smelled the worst, were burned inside the sick cave. The idea was to choke out the sickness. Unfortunately, it often just choked the patients. Some say this was an early attempt at disinfection. Others say it was just an excuse for the shaman to get high. Either way, the air quality inside the sick cave was somewhere between unbreathable and lung melting. Now, when plague really got out of control, the clan took drastic action: the ritual purge. This involved everyone, sick or not, drinking a foul-tasting concoction made from fermented berries, fish guts, and tree bark. Its purpose? Induce vomiting and diarrhea to clear the body. Yes, prehistoric medicine often involved catastrophic loss of bodily fluids. Those who purged and survived were considered cleansed. Those who didn't became cautionary tales. Next, let's explore snake bites, because prehistoric nature wasn't content with just fevers and injuries. No, it also sent venomous reptiles to spice things up. When someone got bitten, the immediate response was screaming, followed by incantations, and finally, mouth suction. Yes, someone, usually a junior hunter desperate for approval, was tasked with sucking the venom out. No one knew if it worked, but at least it looked heroic. If suction didn't help, they moved on to cutting and burning. The bite area was sliced open and seared with hot sticks. The theory? Kill the venom. The reality? Add third-degree burns to your list of problems. Survival was a coin toss. If the patient lived, they were awarded a snake-tooth necklace, both a fashion statement and a warning to snakes everywhere. Now, brace yourself for amputation prehistoric edition. Sometimes a wound festered, sometimes a limb just stopped working. And in those rare, horrifying cases, cavemen had to make the call: chop it off or watch them die. Tools, sharpened stone, courage, and a lot of yelling. Anesthesia? Bite this stick and think of the afterlife. The surgeon, usually the strongest guy around, used a brute force to remove the limb, then sealed the stump with fire or pitch. Post-amputation care involved stuffing the wound with moss, wrapping it tightly, and whispering motivational slogans like, "You still have one arm." Some amputees survived and even became legends: one-handed spear throwers, one-legged dancers, and the like. But most didn't, and their skeletons are found today with sad little notches where limbs once were. Speaking of legends, some injuries led to accidental medical breakthroughs. One caveman with a severe skull injury survived for years, developing odd behaviors like talking to rocks or walking backward. The clan naturally made him a shaman, assuming he had a hotline to the gods. His treatments included bizarre rituals like rolling in mud at dawn or chanting at mushrooms. Did it help? Number. Was it entertaining? Yes, and thus placebo effect was born. Let's not forget the role of animals in healing. Cavemen observed that some creatures, like dogs and wolves, licked wounds. So naturally, they encouraged it. If you were injured, someone might lure a wolf cub to lick your wound, believing it had spirit saliva. In reality, it usually just led to infection, or in one tragic case, a missing nose. Eventually, they downgraded to using domesticated dogs, who at least didn't bite off ears. And now, we must address death rituals, because let's face it, not everyone made it. When someone died from sickness or injury, the clan held the farewell stomp, a loud, chaotic dance to scare off lingering spirits. The body was either buried under rocks to prevent reanimation, or placed in a tree so birds could carry the soul away. Occasionally, they cremated the dead, accidentally at first during a fire mishap, and then deliberately when they realized ashes took up less space. Sometimes, however, the dead didn't stay quiet. If a new illness swept through, the clan might blame a restless ancestor, digging up the bones and moving them elsewhere, usually to a bog or river in hopes of drowning the bad vibes. In their own way, cavemen developed a full spectrum of healthcare, from triage to trauma care, from mental health rituals to funeral rites. It was brutal, often ineffective, and sometimes hilariously misguided, but behind every bark poultice and leech application was a desperate attempt to defy the odds. Their lives were short, their tools primitive, but their will to survive was massive. They didn't have knowledge, we have that luxury, but they had improvisation, community, and a deep respect for those who endured. Every healed bone, every scar, every breath taken after sickness, those were victories. So the next time you sneeze and reach for a tissue, remember, a caveman somewhere tried to treat that with hot rocks, bloodletting, and aggressive chanting. And somehow, it almost worked. Welcome to the dark comedy of prehistoric medicine, where survival wasn't guaranteed, but it was fought for, one painful, ridiculous step at a time. Hey guys, imagine waking up to a world where the sun is a pale promise behind walls of ice, where each breath cracks like brittle pottery, and the closest thing you have to a thermostat is the thickness of your animal hide cloak. What did cavemen actually fear most during winter? Was it the gnawing emptiness in their bellies, the merciless howl of pack-hunting wolves, or the silent betrayal of a frozen spear shaft that snaps just when you need it most? In the next 10 seconds, I'll reveal the primal terror that haunted every flickering firelight across millennia, and it has nothing to do with snow angels. Stick around, because this is about to get bone-chilling. When the first autumn leaves fell, every clan leader knew winter was coming, not as a horizon-bound event, but as a living, breathing apocalypse. The initial fear wasn't the cold itself, that was merely the backdrop to far worse nightmares. No, the true terror was the thin line between feast and famine. Think of a colossal stone hand squeezing your gut. One wrong misstep in the late hunts, one failed mammoth trap, and the entire clan teetered on the edge of starvation. Dry grasses crackled underfoot like brittle bones, and each sunrise brought the same frantic question. Do we have enough food to survive until spring? Stockpiles of dried meat, fat-packed gourds, and sun-bleached tubers were fortunes hoarded against an enemy more brutal than any predator. Entropy. Hide bundles rattled in smoky caves, each strip of jerky a life-or-death stock certificate. And yet, even the most meticulous preservation could betray you. A single humid night inside a poorly sealed cave could turn weeks of labor into a festering heap of rancid flesh. The clan's tinkerers, women and men equally gifted with desperate creativity, rigged stone ceiling slabs, layered clay over cave mouths, and danced appeasement rituals to the spoilage spirits. Still, they knew that no matter the prayers, a damp patch or a mold bloom could spell collective disaster. Next came the fear of fire failure. In a world without matches or lighters, fire was not just warmth, it was life itself. Just one blown-out hearth meant frozen fingers too stiff to tie knots, embers too cold to ignite fresh tinder, and plunging darkness that invited every lurking terror. Wolves, wandering bands of starving rivals, or the silent creep of frostbite. Clans guarded their ember chests like sacred relics, hollowed-out stones filled with coals wrapped in moss and reignited each dawn with hot coals transferred from an unbroken chain of hearths. A misplaced ember, a careless stone toss, or a sudden wind tunnel could snuff out generations' worth of labor, leaving survivors to rub sticks until their arms bled, praying for sparks. Then there was the siege of predators, amplified tenfold by hunger. Wolves grew bold when prey vanished. Starving saber-tooths expanded their territories into human hunting grounds. Nightly patrols along ice-crusted perimeters became death marches. Torches ablaze, club-wielding sentries lined like executioners, every crunch of snow a potential ambush. The fear was universal, that the next howl could be behind your door, that the infant in its moss cradle might be torn away. The clan often improvised flick-flame barriers, smoke smudges around cave entrances, and unleashed harassing chants to scare off prowlers. Still, every wolf pack knew that hunger erased caution, and any pretense of safety could collapse under predatory desperation. But far worse was the terror of isolation and disease. Winter spread more than cold. It carried respiratory pathogens through cramped caves. A single cough could spark a plague within stone walls. Without quarantine or medicine, sickness was a clan-wide death sentence. The ailing were sometimes moved to ledge camps, perched precariously on icy slopes, a gamble between leaving them to freeze or allowing contagion to spread. Elders whispered of spirit fevers that claimed half a clan in days, and families kept fever logs in cuneiform-like symbols scratched on bone shards, crosses for each death, slashes for each new case. The dread of watching loved ones burn under furs, sweat-soaked and gasping, haunted every winter hearth. Finally, the most gut-wrenching fear, the collapse of social bonds under stress. In the brutal calculus of survival, every adult body counted, and each afraid, desperate adult could turn on the group. Theft of prized, stored food, secret consumption of hidden jerky caches, or the betrayal of tracking signals to rival clans meant two terrifying outcomes. Either the clan fractured under mistrust, or deadly reprisals ensured more bodies on the ice. To guard against this, elders enforced grueling rituals of shared hardship, communal hunger rites where each member took turns fasting, shared firewatch shifts, and nightly solidarity oaths chanted in quaking voices. These brittle pacts held clans together, but everyone knew just one broken vow could unravel trust like snapping sinew. So when winter came, cavemen feared not the freezing winds, but the collapse of their fragile world. Spoiled food, extinguished fires, ravenous predators, creeping disease, and the fracture of unity. Each night, as ice nibbed at the cave mouth and torches guttered, they stared into the darkness, knowing that survival demanded more than warmth. It demanded relentless ingenuity, unyielding solidarity, and the willingness to face every nightmare their ancestors had ever conjured. Because in the merciless winters of prehistory, the greatest fear was not the cold, but the knowledge that tomorrow might be the day the world forgot to stay alive. Let's talk about food hallucinations, a side effect of starvation in pure desperation. After weeks of surviving on dried roots that tasted like wet rope and mammoth fat scraped from the underside of skulls, the mind began to wander. People saw phantom feasts dancing before their eyes, roasted aurochs, rivers of honey, birds stuffed with berries and dreams. Entire clans chased invisible animals across ice fields, only to collapse in snowbanks, licking frozen air. Children sang songs to imaginary fruits, and elders claimed to remember the time we had so much meat we fed it to the wolves. And speaking of wolves, cavemen feared not just the actual wolves, but the horrifying half-wolf, half-human myths that came out every winter, to keep kids obedient. These were the bone eaters, creatures said to wear human skin by day, but at night roamed the snow, sniffing out the weakest member of every clan. Parents whispered, "Eat your boiled moss, or the bone eater will find you." Naturally, every distant howl sent kids into full panic, clutching rocks and shaking in their squirrel-hide booties. Bone eaters weren't real, of course, but the fear of becoming that weak, slow, starving straggler, that was very real. Because cavemen didn't just fear death, they feared being left behind. Now let's move to winter injuries, the slow-motion nightmares of daily survival. Imagine slipping on ice while carrying a 100-pound log, hearing your ankle snap and realizing you are now a burden. In the summer, an injured person could rest, heal, contribute later. In winter, the group faced a choice: carry you, feed you extra, protect you, or abandon you under the snowdrift. No one wanted to say it, but the message was clear: you break, you die. People wrapped every joint with hide strips, walked with spears used as crutches, and avoided heavy lifting like their life depended on it, because it did. Frostbite was another constant creeping terror. Fingers and toes weren't seen as essential until they started turning black and falling off. Clan members took turns massaging each other's extremities, sharing body heat, and sometimes urinating on frozen hands. Hey, warmth is warmth, and if your nose froze and fell off, congratulations, you were now wind-kissed, which was a poetic way of saying disfigured and lucky to be alive. But disfigurement had its own price. Those missing fingers couldn't hunt, couldn't throw, couldn't skin. Winter wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a battle to stay useful, because usefulness meant you were worth saving. Let's not ignore the fear of thin ice, the deadliest kind of betrayal. Lakes that fed the clan during warmer months now wore deceptive skins of frost. One misstep, and you vanished into the frigid blackness, dragged under by currents and panic. Entire families disappeared, leaving only cracked holes and drifting bits of fur. Elders told horror tales of the under-ice spirits, who waited with icy hands to grab the careless. Kids were forced to crawl on bellies when near frozen water, both to test the ice and as punishment for annoying the shaman. Every year someone fell through. Every year the clan mourned, but mostly took notes on which lakes were now haunted. Let's pivot to madness, because cabin fever wasn't invented by modern humans. Imagine living in a cramped cave for 3 months, stuck with the same dozen people, inhaling the same fire-smoked air, hearing the same stories, watching the same snow. Every single day, people snapped. Some started talking to rocks. Others created elaborate snow gods out of boredom and fear. Children fought over imaginary toys, and adults had arguments that escalated into full-on brawls over who farted during the sacred fire chant. The clan had no concept of therapy, so instead, they developed ritualized screaming. Every week, the whole group gathered to howl at the cave walls. It was strangely effective, but the real mental horror? Nightmares. Winter dreams were often feverish, intense, and filled with visions of endless snow, teeth in the dark, and falling endlessly into icy voids. Shamans claimed these were winter warnings, messages from dead ancestors. Some believed the dreams killed you. People who didn't wake up, frozen in their sleep, were said to have been claimed by the ice spirits. The result? No one wanted to sleep too deeply, so some stayed awake for days, gnawing on raw fat and whispering to their spirit to stay alert. Sleep deprivation created its own loop of terror, paranoia, hallucinations, panic. Winter, in short, was psychological warfare. Now, onto firewood shortages, because nothing screamed impending doom like an empty woodpile. Wood runs out, the fire dies. The fire dies, everyone dies. People risked everything to gather wood, even in storms. Cavemen told grim tales of the last gathering, where hunters were sent out and never returned, or came back missing fingers with frozen ears, or dragging a single pathetic branch. Some tried burning frozen dung, but it mostly smoked and stank. Others burned old tools, wooden spears, and sometimes cave furniture. Anything to keep the fire going. That's when you knew hope was running thin, when the fire pit was fed your only chair. Winter didn't just kill, it eroded, humiliated, and pushed. It turned proud hunters into begging scavengers, skilled tool makers into firewood thieves, and brave leaders into panicked wrecks. Every frost-covered sunrise wasn't a triumph. It was a reminder that you were still on trial, and winter hadn't passed its verdict yet. Because cavemen didn't just fear the cold, they feared what winter turned them into. Hunger-stricken ghosts of themselves, praying to a silent sky, watching snowflakes fall like ashes on the graves they were still digging. Now, let's talk about rival clans, because if you thought winter was bad on its own, imagine facing other starving humans who are just as cold, just as desperate, and very possibly eyeing your food stockpile like it's the last roast mammoth on Earth. Winter turned neighbors into raiders, and peaceful seasonal alliances into frost-covered betrayals. Imagine guarding your cave's entrance with a spear made from bone while hearing whispers from the tree line. Was that the wind or someone creeping in to steal your jerky stash? The fear of midnight raids was very real. Clans took turns standing watch, eyes burning from smoke and sleeplessness, clutching rocks, clubs, or whatever vaguely pointy object they could find. They devised elaborate alarm systems, like hanging dried shells that clattered at the faintest breeze, or tying sinew trip lines across narrow paths. Paranoia reached absurd levels. Even stray footprints in the snow sparked full-blown clan meetings, complete with accusations, threats, and occasionally, someone being banished for acting too hungry. Worse yet, there were the winter wanderers, solitary survivors of other clans, usually starving, delirious, and possibly cannibalistic. Imagine a knock at your cave entrance and there's a stranger covered in snow, mumbling about sharing the warmth. Do you let them in, help them, or bash their skull before they do it to you? The fear of stranger danger wasn't a children's lesson, it was a survival tactic. One wrong guest, and your entire cave could be robbed, infected, or killed in your sleep. Let's take a detour into cannibalism, because yes, that was the unspoken fear, the last taboo, the nuclear option of survival. When all else failed, when no more food could be scraped from under rocks or scavenged from frozen animals, the mind began to wander. Cavemen didn't casually resort to people eating, but when faced with starvation, someone always suggested it in hushed tones around the dying fire. Now they had rules. Usually, it started with the already dead, someone who froze or fell or accidentally drank too much fermented moss water and never woke up. Elders often decided what was acceptable and which corpse could become stew. People told themselves stories to make it bearable, that the dead wanted to help the living, that their spirit would live on, that eating their thigh was actually an honor. Sarcastic, yes, but the alternative was death. Sometimes, though, things got darker. There were legends of the ice feasters, clans who embraced cannibalism as a winter strategy, organized, methodical, and terrifying. They marked potential targets, rationed human meat, and kept bones for tools. Other clans told stories of screaming victims in caves slick with blood, partly as horror, partly as a warning. Don't become them, and don't attract them. So winter wasn't just about fear of death, but fear of becoming something monstrous just to survive. Let's explore spiritual terror now, because cavemen didn't have science, but they had imagination, and nothing fuels it like freezing in the dark. Winter spirits, ice demons, snow witches, these were household names. Every unexplained event, a failed hunt, spoiled food, frostbite, had supernatural explanations. People feared offending the winter gods, which meant constant rituals, offerings, enchanted apologies to the ice, wind, and snow. Shrines were built in freezing caves, decorated with animal skulls, painted with blood, fat, and soot. The shaman, the clan's overworked, overdramatic spiritual leader, would dance, moan, and throw herbs into the fire, while everyone else huddled in terror. If things went badly, like if 3 people froze in one night, the shaman might declare a curse or a possession, and suddenly someone in the group became the scapegoat. They'd be forced to fast, sit outside the cave for days, or even be exiled to appease the spirits. It wasn't personal, it was primitive risk management. Let's move to snow blindness, a lesser-known but deeply feared condition. After staring at sunlight reflected off snow for hours, boom, temporary blindness. Imagine a hunter, returning from the ice plains, suddenly unable to see, stumbling into the cave and whispering, "The snow took my sight." Panic ensues. People feared it was a curse, a spirit attack, or punishment for some forgotten sin. The solution? A mix of animal fat rubbed in the eyes, chanting in days of darkness. Most recovered, some didn't. Those who remained blind? They became winter listeners, believed to hear the spirits more clearly, and were used in dangerous scouting missions, because, well, they were already blind. Let's not forget the frozen dead, because winter was also the time for unburied corpses. Ground too hard to dig, snow too deep to cover them properly. Bodies often froze in place, eyes open, watching the living. This horrified everyone. People built corpse shelters, mini caves for the dead, decorated with rocks and bones to protect them from spirits. Still, children swore they saw the dead move, and adults feared ghostly revenge if proper rituals weren't done. So winter's horror wasn't just what could kill you, it was what stayed with you, staring back, whispering in frozen dreams, reminding everyone that no one truly escaped. Cavemen feared memory itself, the knowledge that this winter might break them, and even if they survived, they would never be the same again. Now, let's talk about starvation logic, the psychological battlefield of a clan slowly losing its grip. See, hunger doesn't just eat your body, it devours your rational thought. People began debating the edibility of everything. Could you chew leather into a meal? Could you boil bones for the 6th time and still extract spirit broth? Was it morally wrong to snack on your own hair if you weren't using it? One elder swore by a soup made from crushed charcoal, melted snow, and rabbit urine. He called it black stew and claimed it gave him visions. He also died, but not before half the clan tried it. Pet animals, if they existed, didn't survive the winter. That friendly wolf dog you raised from a pup, now considered potential meat. Emotional attachments were a luxury, and practicality ruled the cave. People made bets on who would last longer, the dog or grandpa. Hint, it wasn't the dog. Guilt? Sure. But you know what replaced guilt? Protein. Let's shift to fashion-induced frostbite, because cavemen didn't have Patagonia. They had animal skins, stiff, heavy, badly stitched, and often infested with lice. Winter fashion was not about looking good. It was about not dying naked in the snow. People wrapped themselves in layered furs, sometimes so thick they couldn't move their arms. The result? Hilarious waddling walks and increased falls, which often led to injury, which, as we've discussed, meant possible abandonment. And you don't know itch until you've spent 3 months wrapped in fur sewn with bone needles, never washed, crawling with fleas, lice, and the occasional spider. Scratching became a group pastime, and shamanic anti-itch rituals involved smoking your clothes over dung fires or rubbing rancid bear fat on the skin to confuse the parasites. Did it work? Number. Did people swear by it? Yes, because winter made everyone insane. Now we must discuss toilet horror. There was no plumbing, no outhouses, just holes in the ground or worse, the snow outside. Imagine crawling out into a blizzard to squat behind a rock, pants down, wind howling, eyes watering from cold. And if it's night, hope you don't sit on a frozen log, or worse, a hidden snake den. Yes, some snakes hibernated in winter nooks. Some people got bit. One unlucky hunter had his backside turned blue and swollen, earning the nickname Snake Butt for the rest of his short, painful life. Some clans designated indoor toilet corners, which only worked for a week or so, before the stench reached apocalypse levels. Shamans burned herbs, people gagged, and eventually someone volunteered to shovel it out. That someone was usually the youngest or the least useful. It was called snow duty, and if you refused, you were told, then may the dung spirits claim your sleep. Let's now remember the eternal darkness. In deep winter, daylight barely existed. Cavemen didn't just fear the cold, they feared the endless night. Darkness brought confusion, fear, and the belief that time had stopped. People told stories of a mythical time when the sun vanished forever and the world became an ice prison. Shamans claimed they could chant the sun back. How? By sacrificing objects, or occasionally animals, or if things got really desperate, someone's finger. It's just a pinky, they said. The sun is worth it. During this time, people used firelight for everything. Cooking, warmth, light, and protection from spirits. If the fire died, everyone screamed. Fire keepers were revered and feared. If one failed to keep the flame alive, they might be shamed, beaten, or sent into the snow to reflect. Fires were fed constantly, even with items of value, tools, art, and sometimes old spears, because fire came first. The fear of cold darkness overrode everything. Now let's honor the shaman's greatest fear, being wrong. Shamans had answers for every winter problem. Why the hunt failed, why the fire smoked, why the baby cried. If their rituals failed, faith cracked, and the clan panicked. Shamans resorted to increasingly absurd rituals, dancing naked in snow, smearing mud on faces, or declaring a rock sacred. If all else failed, blame someone else. An unclean spirit, usually an unlucky clan member who was then ostracized, punished, or used in the next ritual. Winter wasn't just a test of survival. It was a test of who could lie most convincingly to keep morale up. We can't forget children's winter games, which were mostly disasters in disguise. Sliding down icy slopes on animal skulls, having snowball fights with rocks inside, or playing who can hold their breath in snow longest. Every game had injury potential, and parents just hoped the strong ones survived. If a child broke a limb, it was splinted badly, and they were told, "Don't cry, the wolves love tears." And now, the greatest fear of all, hope. Every caveman feared believing they'd make it, because hope led to disappointment. A sunny day could become a blizzard, a fat deer could escape, a full food stash could mold overnight. So people learned to expect the worst. They feared joy, celebration, and smiling too soon. Shamans warned against calling the ice by being too happy. Superstition ran wild. No singing before the solstice, no laughter near the dead, and never ever say, "I think it's warming up." That was tempting fate, and fate was cruel. In the end, cavemen didn't fear just the elements, or starvation, or wolves. They feared themselves, what they might do, who they might become, what they might lose. Winter stripped them bare, tested every instinct, broke many and spared few. But those who made it? They didn't just survive, they outstubborned nature itself, one frostbitten toe at a time.